Coming American Revolution. By Ogden Kraut. A terrible revolution will take place in the land of America, such as has never been seen before, for the land will literally be left without a supreme government, and every species of wickedness will run rampant. Peace will be taken from the earth, and there will be no peace only in the Rocky Mountains. This will cause many thousands of the honest in heart to gather there, not because they would be saints, but for safety, and because they would not take up the sword against their neighbor. Joseph Smith. Chapter 1. Introduction. The battle between freedom and slavery, good and evil, between Christ and Satan, is presently involving more people and nations than at any time within the epoch of man's history. The cost and consequences of this present controversy stagger the imagination, and it continues with increased acceleration. The time in which we live has been clearly portrayed in the scrolls of every ancient prophet. We are the living witnesses to the final struggle for the mind and soul of all men. The last battle is being fought on every side. This is a conflict and a war in which there can be no neutrals. Every man must make his enlistment or be swept aside. If the diabolical powers of communism should conquer the world, no one stands to lose more than the saints of God. Therefore, they should be the most valiant soldiers in the ranks of the opposition. Men of integrity should feel as the ancient apostle Paul, who prevailed upon every man to put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore, take unto you the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. F. 6:11-13. In this conflict, truth becomes mightier than a sword, exposing evil more powerful than guns, and a life of dignity more highly prized than a conquering army. The powers of darkness are gathering the greatest numbers, but honor shall ever prevail. Communism will not win. But the blood and carnage will stain every nation with a destruction unsurpassed in the pages of history. The longer we slumber in lethargy, the more horrible will be the result. Another Alamo or Pearl Harbor could reduce our great government to anarchy and the clash of war upon our own soil. The enemy is subtle and near at hand. Every well-informed citizen should arise and challenge the perils which endanger our country, our freedoms, our all. It is not just enough to proclaim the truth, one must also decry the evils. National and international problems are of little concern to the average American, who is more concerned with his weekend fishing trip, the Wednesday night bowling team, or the last addition to his rock collection. His toothache holds greater concern than the millions and millions who starve and die as slaves under communism. The average citizen who has 3 good meals a day and a comfortable bed at night has no comprehension of the terror that fills the breasts of these captive people who feel the brutality of the Red Army. Any refugee from behind the Iron Curtain can tell of being aroused in the middle of the night by the secret police, hours and hours of interrogations, prisons, and beatings. Added to these are the loss of all their freedoms, abject poverty, and a life of constant fear. Amidst a life of misery and suffering, every slave of communism is looking to America as their savior. America is their last refuge of hope. Each day as they pray, they look with eagerness to the American people for deliverance, but are we looking back to them? Chapter 2. The background of communism. The breeding ground for international communism was spawned in a befitting mind and locale for such a diabolical conspiracy. The character and life of Karl Marx reflected well the nature and source of the totalitarian doctrines of communism. His outlook and disposition bore the traits of a revolutionary. He was opposed to everything and had only contempt for people as individuals. His own wife told him constantly that she would rather be in the grave than married to him. The history of this man reveals that he was a tramp and a vagabond who lived in dirt and filth. His laziness required that he live off of the fruits and labors of others, which is characteristic of the doctrine he advocated. He constantly sought ways and means of causing divisions, destroying things as they exist, and pulling down every form of law and government. Human liberty and free enterprise were his greatest enemies because he was creating the most dreaded dictatorship and slavery ever known to man. He called it communism. As wicked and atrocious as communism was, it gained many dedicated converts. In 1903, Nikolai Lenin and 17 other disciples of Marx established the Bolshevik movement in Russia, or the Communist Party, as we know it today. Keep in mind that in 1903 there were only 18 communists in the Soviet Union. Today, over 1 billion people in the world are affected by this godless conspiracy. In 1917, with 40,000 supporters, Nikolai Lenin conquered the Soviet Union, a nation with almost 150 million people. By 1960, the party of Lenin had enslaved 1 billion conquered people and murdered 50 million or more in doing so. In almost a half a century, the communists grew from 18 to 1 billion, which is the most phenomenal growth of any world movement or political power in the history of mankind. It is no longer a question of will the communistic malignancy conquer the world, or can it conquer the world? It is conquering the world. Communist America, must it be? By R.J. Hargis, page 5. The basis of Lenin's communist doctrine is the belief that government can plan and direct the lives of people. The more control over the thinking and actions of the people by government, the more efficient and perfect they believe that government is. To believe in communism, one must surrender all liberty and free agency to the state. The state then becomes the owner and operator of every industry, farm, and business. Another communist doctrine declares that all religion, Christian, Judaism, Buddhism, or whatever is a fraud, a superstition, and dangerous to the communist philosophy. Therefore, the beliefs and the worship of the masses must eventually cease to exist under their control. Religion is the antithesis of communism. A disciple of communism is eternally at war. He must subvert, sabotage, infiltrate, and destroy all opposing forms of government, religion, or enterprise that stands in opposition to the communist movement. To win over ideas, individuals, or nations, the communist uses every conceivable tactic. Communist agitators use the worst of human intents and emotions to subvert people. Envy, hate, avarice, conceit, laziness, gluttony, lust, selfishness, hatred and fear are imposed upon anyone and everyone. Many men in high government positions, top scientists in sensitive industrial positions, or even the shiftless and lazy are bribed, blackmailed, bought off, or praised for enlistment into the red cause. The colossal myth, the paramount lie of these latter days, is the false notion that communists are exponents of a respectable political ideology, susceptible to the controls of morality, decency, humanity. The truth is that communism is an international criminal conspiracy, larger in magnitude and more deadly than any organized crime syndicate. It is more treacherous than the legions of any known army. The leaders of communism are responsible for more mass murders, mass tortures of innocent people, and slave imprisonment of more nations than any other tyrants in recorded history. They are dedicated to the overthrow of every existing government on earth. The grand final objective and triumph is for the overthrow of the United States of America. In 1917 the Bolsheviks began the brutal revolution, which began with food riots in Leningrad, but innocently as it may have seemed, underlying cause was the revolutionaries. The results were the death of over 2 million people and the overthrow of the provisional government of the Soviet Union. With the discontent of the people through riots and the strikes, the Bolsheviks killed the Tsar and his family and within the year were in power. However, in a revolution, murder and slavery are part of a continual process of purification. By the time Stalin came into power, he was liquidating tens of thousands of his citizens. Under his rule, peasants by the millions, who refused to surrender their crops to the state, were forced into starvation. Slave labor camps were filled with political prisoners. The Kremlin tried to apply its doctrine of atheism by murdering thousands of priests and destroying many of their churches. Joseph Stalin killed millions of Russian people, but when Nikita S. Khrushchev came into power, he was not to be outdone. He therefore more than doubled that number. A befitting title was given to Nikita by his own people. He will always be remembered in Russia as the butcher of the Ukraine. Strikes, riots, revolution, anarchy, and then overthrow were the natural principles which elected the communists into power. When these tactics were not used, then the ballot of tanks and artillery put them into office. The grandiose doctrines of Bolshevism spilled over into Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania by 1940. Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Poland, Romania, Yugoslavia, Tibet, East Germany, North Korea, North Vietnam, and China have all been baptized with blood into the congregation of the communists. In 1869, a young revolutionist by the name of Nechayer prepared a revolutionary catechism which has been a foundation for all communist revolutions from that day until now. It illustrates how a few men can destroy whole societies and nations. The Revolutionary Catechism. The duties of the revolutionary toward himself. 1. The revolutionary is a dedicated man. He has no personal inclinations, no business affairs, no emotions, no attachments, no property and no name. Everything in him is subordinated towards a single exclusive attachment, a single thought and a single passion, the revolution. 2. In the very depths of his being, not only in words but also in deeds, he has torn himself away from the bonds which tie him to the social order and to the cultivated world, with all its laws, moralities and customs, and its generally accepted conventions. He is their enemy, and if he continues to live with them, it is only in order to destroy them more quickly. 3. The revolutionary despises all dogmas and refuses to accept the mundane science, leaving them for future generations. He knows only one science: the science of destruction. For this reason, and only for this reason, he will study mechanics, physics, chemistry, and perhaps medicine. But all day and night he studies the living science of peoples, their characteristics and circumstances, and all the phenomena of the present social order. The object is the same: the prompt destruction of this filthy order. 4. The revolutionary despises public opinion. He despises and hates the existing social order in all its manifestations. For him, morality is everything which contributes to the triumph of the revolution. Immoral and criminal is everything that stands in his way. 5. The revolutionary is a dedicated man, merciless toward the state and altogether merciless toward the educated classes, and he can expect no mercy from them. Between him and them there exists, declared or concealed, a continual and irreconcilable war for life or for death. He must accustom himself to enduring torture. 6. Tyrannical toward himself, he must be tyrannical toward others. All the soft and tender affections arising from kinship, friendship and love, all gratitude and even all honor must be obliterated, and in their place, there must be the cold and single-minded passion for the work of revolution. For him there exists only one pleasure, one consolation, one reward, one satisfaction: the success of the revolution. Night and day he must have but one thought, one aim: merciless destruction. Aiming and indefatigably toward this end, he must be ready to destroy himself and destroy with his own hands everyone who stands in his way. 7. The nature of the true revolutionary excludes all romanticism, all sensitivity, all exultations and enthusiasms. He must also exclude private vendettas and personal hatred. The revolutionary passion, practiced at every moment of the day until it becomes a habit, is to be employed with cold calculation. At all times and in all places the revolutionary must refuse to allow himself to be guided by his personal impulses, but only by the total submergence of himself in the revolution. Relationship of the revolutionary toward the revolutionary comrades. 8. The revolutionary can have no friendly feeling to anyone unless, like him, the other is dedicated to revolutionary affairs. His degree of friendship, devotion, and obligation toward a comrade must be determined only by the degree of the comrade's usefulness in the practical work of complete and destructive revolution. 9. It is superfluous to speak of solidarity among revolutionaries. The whole strength of the revolutionary work lies in this: comrades who possess the same revolutionary passion should, as much as possible, deliberate all important matters together and come to unanimous conclusions. But the revolutionary, in accomplishing whatever plan is finally decided upon, must rely altogether on himself. The contract of revolutionary destruction demands that no comrades come running up with advice and assistance, if this detracts from the success of the plan. 10. Each comrade should have under him several revolutionaries of the second or third rank, i.e. comrades who are not completely dedicated. These should be regarded as portions of a common fund of revolutionary capital, to be expended as he thinks fit. He should expend them as economically as possible, always attempting to derive the utmost possible use from them. He should regard himself as capital consecrated to the triumph of the revolution, and he must not be regarded as expendable without the entire agreement of the fully initiated comrades. 11. When a comrade is caught in a dangerous extremity and the question arises whether he should be rescued, the revolutionary must make his decision without recourse to personal feelings, but only in terms of the eventual success of the revolution. Therefore it is necessary to balance carefully the usefulness of the comrade in so far as it is a question of revolutionary strength, and the most careful consideration should be made to decide whether he is worth rescuing. Relationship of the revolutionary toward society. 12. Whether a new member, after giving proof of loyalty by word and deed, should be accepted is a matter to be decided only by unanimous agreement. 13. The revolutionary enters the world of the state, of the classes, and of so-called culture, and he lives in this world only because he has faith in its speedy and total destruction. He is not a revolutionary if he feels any sympathy for this world. He must not hesitate to destroy any position, any place, or any man in this world. All must be equally detested by him. All the worse for him if he has parents, friends and loved ones. He is no longer a revolutionary if they can stay his hand. 14. Aiming at implacable destruction, the revolutionary can and sometimes must live within society while pretending to be other than what he is. A revolutionary must penetrate everywhere, among the lowest and the middle classes, and in the houses of commerce, in the churches, in the palaces of the aristocracy. He must know the world of the bureaucrats and of the military and of literature, and he must enter into the third division, and even into the Winter Palace. 15. All the members of this filthy society can be split up into several categories. The first category comprises those to be condemned to death without delay. The comrade should compile a list of those to be condemned, weighing the relative gravity of their crimes against their value to the revolution, and the executions should be carried out according to the prepared order. 16. In the preparation of these lists and in placing the condemned according to the prepared order, no private sense of outrage should be considered, nor is it necessary to pay attention to the hatred provoked by these people among the comrades or the people. But hatred and a sense of outrage must to some extent be made use of, because these things help to incite rebellion among the people. It is necessary to be guided only by the relative usefulness of these executions for the sake of the revolution. Above all, those who are especially inimical to the revolutionary organization must be destroyed. Their violent and sudden deaths will produce the utmost panic in the government, it will shake the foundations of government, and deprive it of the services of its most intelligent and energetic agents. 17. The second group consists of those to whom we concede life provisionally, in order that their bestial behavior shall drive the people to inevitable revolt. 18. The third category consists of a multitude of personages or animals distinguished neither for intelligence nor for energy, those who enjoy wealth, connections, influence, and power. These must be exploited in every possible way, they must be implicated and confused, as far as possible their dirty secrets should be found out, so that we can make them our slaves. Their power, influence and connections, their riches and energy, will form an inexhaustible treasure and a precious help in our various undertakings. 19. The fourth category is composed of ambitious people and liberals of various shades. We shall pretend we are following their ideas and give them cause to think we are blindly conspiring with them, while in fact we take them under our own control. We shall root out all their secrets and comprise them to the uttermost, so that there will be no way out for them any they can be used to create disorder in the state. 20. The fifth category consists of doctrinaires, conspirators, revolutionaries, all idle word spillers who orate before meetings or in front of a piece of paper. They must be constantly driven toward making violent declarations carefully arranged to agree with our purpose. The majority of these will leave nothing behind but a vast ruin. From a few of them, we shall attain real revolutionary gains. 21. The sixth category is especially important. Women. They should be divided into three chief divisions. First, those frivolous, thoughtless and vapid women, whom we shall use as we use the third and fourth category of men. Second, women who are ardent, gifted and devoted, but do not belong to us because they have not yet achieved a passionless and austere revolutionary understanding. These must be used like the men of the fifth category. Finally, there are the women who are completely on our side, i.e. those who are wholly dedicated and who have accepted our program in its entirety. We should regard these women as the most valuable of our treasures. Without their help, it would be impossible to succeed. The duties of our society toward the people. 22. The aims of our society are none other than the entire emancipation and happiness of the people, i.e. the common laborers. Convinced that their emancipation and the achievement of this happiness is brought about only by means of an all-destroying popular revolt, we shall see that society will employ all its power, all its resources towards increasing and intensifying the calamities and evils until patience is exhausted, and they will break out in a levy en masse. 23. By a popular revolution, the society does not mean a revolution tailored according to the classic Western model. A pattern which is fundamentally restrained by the existence of property and the traditional social orders of so-called civilization, has cast down one political form only to substitute another, thereby attempting to bring about a so-called revolutionary state. The only salutary form of revolution is one which destroys the entire state to the roots and exterminates all imperial traditions, the whole social order and all the existing classes in Russia. 24. With this end in view, the society refuses to impose any new organizations from above. Any future organization will doubtless work its way through the movement and life of the people. But this is a matter for future generations to decide. Our task is terrible, total, universal, and merciless destruction. Strashno, polno, povzamestno I bezpieczno razruszenia. 25. Therefore, in drawing closer to the people, we must above all unite with those elements of popular life, which from the very beginning of the imperial power of Muscovy, have never ceased to protest, not only in words but in deeds, against everything directly or indirectly connected with the state. Against the nobility, against the bureaucracy, against the priests, against business, and against the tight fist of the extortioner. We must unite with the adventurous tribes of brigands, who are the only true revolutionaries of Russia. 26. To knit the people into a single force which is wholly destructive and wholly invincible, such is our organization, our conspiracy, and our task. Red Shadows, page 11-16. The revolutionary will attract attention and gain followers by the illusion of false promises and vain prospects. Ignorant poor people are assured that come the revolution, they can virtually quit working and move in on the good jobs, the big houses, the best automobiles, and the prettiest women. Poor intellectuals are told that they will be brainy philosopher kings in the communist state. Timid wealthy people are urged to contribute to the Communist Party in hope of buying mercy from the Reds, which they won't get when the great day comes. Idealistic youngsters are occasionally attracted to communism as an alleged shortcut to the rubbing out of all the admitted evils and injustices in the world. Economic, social, religious, racial and national groups are incited by communist agitators to hatred of one another. If you have any resentment on any score, just bring it to a communist agitator or propagandist, and he'll promise you a cure for your inward wound a day or two after the Reds take over. The Nature of the Enemy. By Ruben Mori, page 6. The conquering of nations by the Communist Party has not been done by the means of tanks and artillery as Adolf Hitler did. Nation after nation has crumbled from within through the undermining of red termites. After decaying the political, social and moral structure of a nation, then comes the collapse through revolution and anarchy. Lenin could see no other position in conquering a capitalist nation than by violent revolution. In Lenin's book, The State and the Revolution, which has now become the world's most translated book, he said, "The supersession of the bourgeois state by the proletarian state is impossible without a violent revolution." This course of events compels the revolution to concentrate all its forces of destruction against the state power and to set itself the aim, not of perfecting the state machine, but of smashing and destroying it. The State and the Revolution. 51. 35, 51. Every principle and directive of the Communist Party is aimed at the revolution. Every minor chore or major riot is in the interest of the final revolution and overthrow of the government. Marx, Engels, and Lenin. Gloried in the prospect of the use of force. It is an action, not a reaction. They openly glorified violence as the instrument of progress. Revolution is the core of communist conquest. To them a reformist, one who believes in the adequacy of reforms alone, is beneath contempt. As the student anticipates the day of graduation, as the bride looks forward to the day of her adorning, as the expectant mother awaits the hour of her deliverance, so, with flashing eyes and leaping pulse, the communist looks forward to that golden hour of the future, the day of revolution. Communism Diagnosis and Treatment, page 22. Through these insurrectionist methods, when a communist heads a government in the United States, and that day will come just as surely as the sun rises, that government will not be a capitalistic government, but a Soviet government, and behind this government will stand the Red Army to enforce the dictatorship of the proletariat. William Z. Foster. Committee on Un-American Activities. 82nd Congress, First Session, page 4. All plans and efforts of the Communist Party are towards the goals of 1. Internal revolt and then 2. Military conquest. For many decades America has been a saving influence for the Communist Party. It would have died a natural death had not American intervention been the one factor to preserve it through economic, political, and military aid. Shortly after the Bolsheviks seized power in Russia, in 1917, they sought American diplomatic recognition needed to give them respectability at home and abroad, and to make available credit for the import of foreign goods. Presidents Wilson, Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover refused. By 1933, the Soviet Union was doomed. Stalin had murdered more than 6 million Russian farmers, and the starving population was ready for revolt. Hitler's Germany was a menace in the West, Japan in the East. Stalin stretched out his hands, red with the blood of millions, across the Atlantic, and Franklin Roosevelt grasped them in cordial friendship. It is improbable that the Soviets could have survived another year if Roosevelt had not given them diplomatic recognition in 1933. It is certain they could not have survived World War II without our help. Following the war, American policies in direct American aid helped communists conquer Eastern and Central Europe and gave them China and Asia. Though China under Chiang Kai-shek was our most valuable ally in the Pacific, Roosevelt, at Yalta agreed to Soviet control of Manchuria, a province of China. After we had beaten Japan without any help from the Soviets, Soviet armies equipped with American material occupied Manchuria. Before withdrawing, they gave Chinese communists enough American supplies to make war on our friend, Chiang Kai-shek. Communists and pro-communists in our State Department manipulated American decisions to favor the communists. The Dan Smoot Report. May 2, 1966, Bull. 12, number 18. Very few Americans are awake to the subtle dangers of the Communist Party. J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI said, "Communism is the deadliest danger of our civilization." American apathy assures itself that the communists are nearly all in Moscow or in the jungles of Vietnam, but the Kremlin has succeeded in enlisting, at a conservative estimate, more than 1 million Americans. There are at this moment the equivalent of some 20 combat divisions of enemy troops on American soil. Troops that are loyal only to the Soviets. Congressman Francis E. Walter. March 3, 1958. If there were any way to take an accurate census, it would show that there are more communists living in New York City than are living in Moscow. American Opinion, September 1958. If the communist cannot be detected by sight, his efforts can be determined. Every labor of the party member is directed for the objective of the revolution. The footprints of the Communist Party can be seen throughout the land of America. Their plans and their accomplishments are as easily discerned today as at any previous time. Rules for Revolution. On a dark night in May 1919, 2 lorries rumbled across a bridge and onto the town of Dusseldorf. Among the dozen rowdy, singing Tommies apparently headed for a gay evening were 2 representatives of the Allied military intelligence. These men had traced a wave of indiscipline, mutiny, and murder among the troops to the local headquarters of a revolutionary organization established in the town. Pretending to be drunk, they brushed by the sentries and arrested the ringleaders, a group of 13 men and women seated at a long table. In the course of the raid, the Allied officers emptied the contents of the safe. One of the documents found in it contained a specific outline of rules for bringing about a revolution. It is reprinted here to show the strategy of materialistic revolution and how personal attitudes and habits of living affect the affairs of nations. A. Corrupt the young. Get them away from religion. Get them interested in sex. Make them superficial, destroy their ruggedness. B. Get control of all means of publicity and thereby 1. Get people's minds off their government by focusing their attention on athletics, sexy books and plays, and other trivialities. 2. Divide the people into hostile groups by constantly harping on controversial matters of no importance. 3. Destroy the people's faith in their natural leaders by holding these latter up to ridicule, obloquy, and contempt. 4. Always preach true democracy, but seize power as fast and as ruthlessly as possible. 5. By encouraging government extravagance, destroy its credit, produce fear of inflation with rising prices and general discontent. 6. Foment unnecessary strikes in vital industries, encourage civil disorders, and foster a lenient and soft attitude on the part of government toward such disorders. 7. By specious arguments cause the breakdown of the old moral virtues, honesty, sobriety, continence, faith in the pledged word, ruggedness. C. Cause the registration of all firearms on some pretext, with a view of confiscating them and leaving the population helpless. From New World News, February 1946. With all of the information and plots which have been discovered, it seems very strange that the news media is so silent on the issues of communism. The Federal Bureau of Information and the House Un-American Activities Committee have been constantly discovering plots, murders, and conspiracies towards the overthrow of our country. But there are areas of news where important information is lying around for the taking with few takers. One of the prime examples is the downgrading by the major press of precise reporting and evaluation of available information on communist activity in the United States. It amounts to an unstated policy of protection of the subject from exact public scrutiny. American Legion. March 1970, page 52. Our civil laws should protect us from any such disaster. One such law is found in the U.S. Code, Title 18, Crimes and Criminal Procedures, Chapter 115, Section 2385. 2385. Advocating overthrow of government. Whoever knowingly or willfully advocates, abets, advises or teaches the duty, necessity, desirability, or propriety of overthrowing or destroying the government of the United States or the government of any state, territory, district or possession thereof, or the government of any political subdivision therein, by force or violence, or by the assassination of any officer of any such government, or whoever, with intent to cause the overthrow or destruction of any such government, prints, publishes, edits, issues, circulates, sells, distributes or publicly displays any written or printed matter advocating, advising, or teaching the duty, necessity, desirability, or propriety of overthrowing or destroying any government in the United States by force or violence, or attempts to do so, or whoever organizes or helps or attempts to organize any society, group, or assembly of persons who teach, advocate, or encourage the overthrow or destruction of any such government by force or violence, or becomes or is a member of, or affiliates with, any such society, group, or assembly of persona, knowing the purposes thereof, shall be fined not more than $20,000 or imprisoned not more than 20 years, or both, and shall be ineligible for employment by the United States or any department or agency thereof, for the 5 years next following his conviction. If 2 or more persons conspire to commit any offense named in this section, each shall be fined not more than $20,000 or imprisoned not more than 20 years, or both, and shall be ineligible for employment by the United States or any department or agency thereof, for the 5 years next following his conviction. As used in this section, the terms organizes and organize with respect to any society, group, or assembly or persons, include the recruiting of new members, the forming of new units, and the regrouping or expansion of existing clubs, classes, and other unite of such society, group, or assembly of persons. June 25, 1948, ch. 645, 62 Stat. 808, July 24, 1956, ch. 678 and 270 Stat. 623, June 19, 1962, Pub. L87 to 486, 76 Stat. 103. In the course of a few years we have witnessed 1. The President of the United States murdered by a communist member of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. 2. 54,246 Americans who died by communists in Korea. Hundreds more of our soldiers are still prisoners of the North Koreans. 3. America has sent $150 billion in foreign aid, trying to stop the forces of communist encroachments. 4. The average citizen crushed with taxations in support of our armies throughout the world. 5. Our gold supply has been diminished, our currency has become federal notes, and we are in debt to many, many nations. In practical terms, our monetary system is already insolvent and on the brink of bankruptcy. 6. Heretofore rioting has now erupted in the destruction of literally billions of dollars in Los Angeles, Harlem, Rochester, Chicago, Detroit, and other cities. 7. Student revolutionaries, anti-police, religion, law and all that is American have become targets of this unseen power. 8. The Supreme Court has made it impossible for federal and state governments to prosecute communists, keep them off public parole, or to compel them to register. Yet we are fighting them in foreign jungles. The policy of being soft on communism has not won us a single favorable influence with them. They still seek with even greater intent the overthrow and destruction of our free enterprise system. They are a class of people without standards, feelings, or understanding. A true representative of this outcropping is well expressed in the character of the head of the Communist Party USA, Mr. Gus Hall, who said, "I dream of the hour when the last congressman is strangled to death on the guts of the last preacher, and, since the Christians seem to love to sing about the blood, why not give them a little of it? Slit the throats of their children and drag them over the mourner's bench in the pulpit, and allow them to drown in their own blood, and then see whether they enjoy singing these hymns." Gus Hall, at the funeral of Eugene Dennis, February 1961. The American communist is but little different from his brothers in foreign lands. Communism molds their nature into a force for destruction and atrocity. Any refugee from behind the Iron Curtain can testify of their tactics. Shows scars of red torture. The Rev. Richard Wurmbrand, with his wife listening, tells Senate Internal Security Subcommittee of tortures he endured while imprisoned by Romanian secret police. The Reverend Mr. Wurmbrand showing scars he got while being tortured by Romanian secret police during 14 years imprisonment. Chicago Tribune, Saturday, May 7, 1966. By Willard Edwards. Chicago Tribune Press Service. Washington, May 6. A Romanian clergyman stripped to the waist at a Senate hearing today and bared the scars he suffered from torture during 14 years of imprisonment under a communist regime. The Rev. Richard Wurmbrard, 56, a Lutheran pastor who left Romania in December and came to the United States a month ago, disclosed that he had quieted 2 anti-war demonstrations by similar demonstrations. He told the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee, with Thomas J. D. Kahn presiding, that he was bewildered by the pro-communist sympathies, especially among clergymen, that he had encountered in this country. Vietnamese scars. Present at gatherings in Newark and Philadelphia, where anti-war demonstrators urged the United States to withdraw from Vietnam, he heard ministers and other speakers defend the peaceful aims of Red China and North Vietnam and denounce American intervention. Bearing the cuts and gashes on his back, chest, and abdomen, he quelled the audiences, he said, by stating, "I received these scars from the communist oppressors you are defending. I have seen many men die under torture rather than turn against God and yield to atheism and communism. There can be no compromise with communism." The Reverend Mr. Wurmbrand was a former representative of the World Council of Churches in Romania. He was imprisoned in 1948 for illegal preaching, released after 8 years, but imprisoned again from 1959 through 1964. When he was released the second time, his captors told him he could preach about Christ, but not against communism. Deplores church advice. "I came into the free world to find many clergymen voicing the same advice," he testified. "I found the World Council of Churches urging an end to attacks on communism. I am very sad. The church can never have peaceful coexistence with atheism. Communism is poisoning the minds of our children. I don't know politics. I cannot talk about the rights and wrongs of the war in Vietnam, but how can one forget the thousands of priests, nuns, and ministers who have been murdered in Red China? How can a minister preach that God is good, but refrain from preaching that communism is bad?" The Reverend Mr. Wurmbrand described the methods of torture in prison. He and many others were locked in windowless dungeons for as long as 2 years in solitary confinement, he said, released only for questioning for 17-hour periods during which they were beaten with whips, slashed with knives, or hit with iron rods. They were required to chant endlessly that communism is good, or Christianity is dead, and often given drugs to induce confessions, he said. Speaks for martyrs. "I speak for all the heroes and saints of the 20th century, Catholics, Protestants, and Jews who died under torture for their religion," he said. "I don't boast of these marks upon my body. I show you the tortured body of my country in my church. I saw a Catholic priest die, boasting that a pope would never shake hands with a communist. I am glad he does not know it has happened." The Reverend Mr. Wurmbrand quoted the prison commandant in Bucharest as addressing the prisoners in this fashion. "You fools. You expect the Americans to come someday and release you. They are coming now to do business with us. If you beg Americans to help you, they ignore you. If you insult them, they help you." 1. D. O'Flaherty, a Washington businessman who accompanied the Reverend Mr. Wurmbrand, said the witness's life had been threatened and asked Dodd to provide federal or police protection for him. Dodd said he will discuss the request in executive session. "I am under God's protection," commented the Rev. Mr. Wurmbrand. "Many at that time were kidnapped like this. A van of the secret police stopped in front of me, 4 men jumped out and pushed me into the van. I was taken away for many years. For 8.5 years, no one knew if I was alive or dead. My wife was visited by the secret police who posed as released fellow prisoners. They told her they had attended my burial. She was heartbroken. Thousands from churches of all denominations went to prison at that time. Not only clergymen were put in jail, but also simple peasants, young boys and girls who witnessed for their faith. The prisons were full, and in Romania, as in all communist countries, to be in prison means to be tortured. Tortures have sometimes been horrible. I prefer not to speak too much about those through which I have passed. When I do, I can't sleep at night. It is too painful. Very soon, another book of mine, Christ in the Communist Prisons, will appear, in which I will recount with many details all our experiences with God in jail. Unspeakable tortures. A pastor by the name of Florescu was tortured with red-hot iron pokers and with knives. He had been beaten very badly. Then he was put in a cell. Starving rats were driven into his cell through a large pipe. He could not sleep, but had to defend himself all the time. If he rested a moment or closed his eyes, the rats would attack him. He was forced to stand for 2 weeks, day and night. The communists wished to compel him to betray his brethren, but he resisted steadfastly. In the end, they brought a son of the age of 14, and they began to whip the son in front of the father, saying that they will continue to beat the child until the pastor says what they wished him to say. The poor man was half mad. He bore it as much as he could. When he could not stand it anymore, he cried to his son, "Alexander, I must say what they want. I can't bear any more your beating." The son answered, "Father, don't do to me the injustice to have a traitor as a parent. Withstand. If they kill me, I die with the words Jesus in my fatherland." The communists, enraged, fell upon child and beat him to death, with blood spattered over the walls of the cell. He died praising God. Our dear brother Florescu was never the same after seeing this. Handcuffs were put on our wrists which had sharp nails on the insides. If we were totally still, they didn't cut us. But in bitterly cold cells, when we would shake with cold, our wrists would be torn by the nails. Christians were hung upside down on ropes and beaten so severely that their bodies swung back and forth under the blows. Christians were put in icebox refrigerator cells which were so cold, frost and ice covered the inside. I myself was thrown into one with but very little clothing on. Prison doctors would watch through an opening until they saw symptoms of freezing to death, then they would give a warning, and guards would rush in to take us out and make us warm. When we were finally warmed, we would immediately be put back in the icebox cells to freeze over and over again. Thawing out, then freezing to within just 1 minute or two of death, then being thawed out again. It continued endlessly. Even today sometimes I can't bear to open a refrigerator. We Christians were put in wooden boxes only slightly larger than we were. This left no room to move. Dozens of sharp nails were driven into every side of the box, with their razor-sharp points sticking into the box. While we stood perfectly still, it was all right. We were forced to stand in these boxes for endless hours. But when we became fatigued and swayed with tiredness, the nails would go into our bodies. If we moved or twitched a muscle, there were the horrible nails. What communists have done to Christians surpasses any possibility of human understanding. I have seen communists torturing Christians, and the faces of the torturers shone with rapturous joy. They cried out while torturing the Christians, "We are the devil. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and powers of evil." We saw that communism is not from men but from the devil. It is a spiritual force, a force of evil, and can only be countered by a greater spiritual force, the Spirit of God. I often asked the torturers, "Don't you have pity in your hearts?" They usually answered with a quotation from Lenin that you cannot make omelets without breaking the shells of eggs, and that you cannot cut wood without making chips fly. I said again, I know also this quotation from Lenin, but there is a difference. When you cut a piece of wood it feels nothing. But here you are dealing with human beings. Every beating produces pain, and there are mothers who weep. It was in vain. They are materialists. For them nothing else than matter exists, and a man is for them like wood, like an eggshell. With this belief they sink to unbelievable depths of cruelty. The cruelty of atheism is hard to believe. When man has no faith in the reward of good or the punishment of evil, there is no reason to be human. A boy dies at the Berlin Wall. The boy lying here, in the shadow of Berlin's wall of shame, is 18 years old Peter Fechter. On August 17, 1962, he and a friend tried scaling the barrier to freedom. Peter's friend escaped, but communist gripos or border guards gunned Peter down. For nearly an hour he moaned and called for help. But no help came. The gripos made no move. While hundreds of onlookers watched agonized from each side of the wall, he slowly bled to death. Pastor Han Junmying told of his escape from red execution. He and hundreds of fellow prisoners were forced into caves over the bodies of murdered comrades. Each man was shot in the head. However, Pastor Han was miraculously skipped. He escaped 3 days later when the entrance stone was dislodged by an Allied bombardment, and lives to testify of these commonplace atrocities. The bodies of 300 enemies of the people were removed from caves near Hamhung, Korea. The victims died of suffocation after the communists forced them into caves and then sealed them off. The influence of the communists and their dupes in this country is well reflected in their activities. They openly boast of their strength and are able to use their own methods to beat us. They may well be the voices behind the scenes which keep telling us that there really is no viciousness or dread in communism. Cultural Trends. By Avis Brick. According to the Brothers Grimm, there was once a shepherd boy who so loved excitement that he was forever turning in false wolf alarms for the fun of seeing the villagers come running to the pasture, armed with clubs and guns to deal with a wolf. As time went on, and no wolf was ever there when the villagers arrived, fewer and fewer of them answered his calls for help, and finally, when the wolf actually came, no one at all paid any attention to him, and the wolf ate him up. If the Grimms were collecting folk tales today, they might find a story that goes like this. Once there was a shepherd boy who was so afraid of having enemies that he refused to believe that wolves existed at all. When the wolf made off with one of his flock, he always managed to think of some likely-sounding story with which to convince himself and the villagers that no wolf had been involved. The wolf grew strong and commenced to raise a family. And the shepherd boy got better and better at inventing stories to account for the diminution of his flock, so that pretty soon no one believed in wolves any longer, and the wolf and his cubs could walk through the village streets without fear of being recognized. If the story were carried to its logical conclusion, the ending would be far worse than that of the original tale. For if the wolves were smart enough to realize that the shepherd boy was the best friend they had, they could pull down all the sheep, and indeed all the villagers, as hunger decreed. All they would have to do would be to save the shepherd boy until last, for he would always find a way of convincing the survivors that there were no wolves. Indeed, I suspect that he would be telling himself the same thing even while the wolves were dragging him off to their lair. There are wolves aplenty in the world today, and our government and our press and our halls of learning are literally full of shepherd boys who cannot allow themselves or anyone else, if they can possibly help it, to believe in wolves. Unlike the shepherd boy in this story, they are willing to admit that Soviet Russia once was somewhat carnivorous, but, they insist, she has filed down her fangs and become a vegetarian. 12 years ago, that particular wolf devoured one of its victims. Russia invaded Hungary and brutally crushed its people. The free world stood in horrified paralysis and watched, unbelieving, and no one lifted a finger to help. Since then, Russia has been involved in many coups and attempted coups among the developing nations. American troops have been killed by Soviet guns and bombs everywhere they have fought in the last 20 years. And once Russia went so far as to indicate quite clearly that the United States was on her list. Russian missiles, aimed at the industrial and population centers of the United States, were installed in Cuba. But our shepherd boys keep telling us how friendly are Moscow's intentions, how good-hearted are the people of Russia, how much the Soviet government has mellowed over the years. Now, once more, one of the civilized nations, Czechoslovakia, has attempted to free itself of its bondage to Moscow and has been crushed under the tanks of the Red Army. The Czechs, knowing that there was no hope of assistance if they rebelled forcibly against Russian rule, knowing that if they were to stand at all, they would have to stand alone, used no weapons but their courage. We may never know just how bloody the crushing of the Czech rebellion was. All we know is that it is not over yet, and that Moscow, with its enforced trade and tribute agreements, will be chewing the bones of that gallant nation for a good many years to come. It happened again and again. We stood helplessly by, watching in disbelief. And before the corpse of that battle for freedom was cold, some of our shepherds were busily explaining that it didn't mean a thing, that Russia was not going back to her old habits. That the ruthless oppression of Czechoslovakia had nothing to do with Russia's international policies. Hatred for America and its principles of liberty is one of the major marks of communists in Russia, China, or USA. America is the prime target for a communist revolution and overthrow. 1. Edgar Hoover, director of the FBI, said, "It is indeed appalling that some members of our society continue to deplore and criticize those who stress the communist danger. What these misguided authorities fail to realize is that the Communist Party, USA, is an integral part of international communism. As the worldwide menace becomes more powerful, the various communist parties assume a more dangerous and sinister role in the countries in which they are entrenched. Public indifference to this threat is tantamount to national suicide." FBI Law Enforcement Bulletin. March 1960. Know Your Enemy. Picture. Chapter 3. Police Brutality. Crime in the United States has increased nearly 8 times faster than the population explosion. To meet this outbreak of violence and lawlessness, civil order can only be deterred by the enforcement of our local police forces. However, the judicial courts have been gradually circumscribing and infringing upon the controls and jurisdiction of the police officers. Arresting criminals has become increasingly difficult for police. Added to the increased controls and handcuffs that are placed on the law officer, he has become the target of violent attacks of violence and a verbal barrage of charges from a certain group of protectors. U.S. Representative Burt L. Talcott of California affirmed this view. Civil disobedience and violence have assumed crisis proportions in our land, and the time has come to call a spade a spade. Recent riots in many of our great cities are not just legitimate protests by civil rights advocates. They are not just spontaneous expressions of hopelessness or frustration on the part of disadvantaged slum dwellers. Rather, they are all too often conscious, planned attacks on the very fabric of our society, perpetrated by lawless insurrectionists who thrive on turmoil and discord. Such elements key their actions to minor involvements of citizens with the police over traffic violations, domestic problems, fire hydrants, and the like. Then they go into action with their bricks, firebombs and guns to reduce an area to shambles and a neighborhood to fear and trembling. To characterize such behavior a legitimate civil rights activity is patently false. Civilized society has the right, yes, the obligation to itself and to generations yet unborn, to prevent erosion of the rule of law. Even now, many of our cities are jungles where crime of all types flourishes, where physical violence against individuals is an everyday occurrence, a constant threat, even in daylight. I subscribe to the fundamental principle of any stable, democratic society that law must be obeyed and order enforced. Society cannot countenance insurrection while it toils to eliminate ignorance, illness or poverty. We must respect, cooperate with, and support our local police. We cannot tolerate conduct which does not constitute good citizenship. Riots, like wars, are difficult to explain. Nevertheless, we must cope with these phenomena because they are intolerable. Perhaps there is no one solution, but I propose that we start with the individual and work up, rather than at the federal level, and percolate down. One earns, rather than demands, respect and acceptability. Goals, even worthy goals, obtained by force, fear, or hooliganism, are short-lived and excessively expensive. We cannot attain worthy goals by unworthy means. Time and energy spent on learning is more profitable than looting, reading is better than rioting, work is more satisfactory than welfare, building is more productive than bombing. Society has an immediate responsibility to put down insurrection, to control mobs, to prevent violence, to secure the peace of a community, to guarantee personal safety, and to protect property. For these important duties, we rely on our policemen. With minor isolated exceptions, they perform superbly. Our system of law enforcement excels any other in the world, in spite of the freedoms accorded our citizens, including hoodlums. The courts recently have leaned over backwards to protect the offender, which makes the job of police officers even more demanding. We who are so competently protected by police officers should reciprocate. We should obey the law as we expect others to do. We should support the police as we expect them to respect us. We should be as quick to applaud good police performance as we are to criticize poor performance. But first, I believe the American people are faced with a grave and fundamental decision which could determine our future as a nation. Either the rule of law will prevail and sustain us, or the primeval law of the jungle will envelop us. Congressman Burt Talcott. Defender, page 7-8. The slogan "Police brutality" is not a new one. Wherever a revolution takes place, there is the constant harassment of the police forces. Dr. Stephen Pawsonley, director of the Program of International Political Studies at the Hoover Institute, Stanford University, and a recognized authority on communism, was asked by the U.S. News and World Report about the significance of communist activities in the United States. He replied, "First of all, it is significant that communists are making trouble for the U.S. today. Secondly, it is significant that this is a recruiting operation. Training and organizing of communist revolutionaries for the America of tomorrow. The numbers are not large. But ... Numbers do not mean much in this sort of activity. A small number of people can create a great deal of unrest, and organizers are always small in number. Essentially, this whole operation that is going on today is an old communist technique known as revolutionary anti-militarism. Communists have written entire textbooks on this subject. The idea is to make it impossible for the military to function efficiently. The same idea applies to the police or to other vital institutions. The weaker the police, the easier it is for communists to operate. The police brutality slogan has been used by the communists in free countries for many years. The subject is taboo in the Soviet Union or in East Germany, where ... they don't hesitate to shoot down refugees. If you study the record of past revolutions, you will find in the period just before the revolution of the many phenomena that are occurring in the United States today. The crime rate goes up, for example. In fact, before a revolution you usually have what you might call a crime epidemic. You have loosening sexual morals, loosening family ties. Things that would have raised the roof 20 years earlier are considered perfectly acceptable in a pre-revolutionary period. This is very clearly true in the US today. There will be more charges of police brutality whenever the police make a stand against the riots, demonstrations, or revolutionary activities of the Communist Party. They charge brutality against others when they are interfered with in their use of brutality. Police forces are realizing that the Communist Party hates them, and they will do everything they can to discredit everything that tends to maintain law and order. Police stand for law and order, the Communist Party seeks chaos and anarchy. Only by breaking down police enforcement can communists gain their objectives. With each passing day, it is becoming more clear to the average citizen that it is criminal brutality and not police brutality that needs our deepest concern. A special committee of the House of Representatives reported on charges of police brutality. This committee issued report number 2290 on January 17, 1961, in which it stated, "The public should not overlook the fact that the police are human beings and are carrying out orders to resist or break up communist demonstrations once staged in defiance of the law. Often roughhouse tactics prevail and communist women and children insult and spit on the police and scratch and bite them. There has been too much denunciation of the police for alleged brutality by _PINKS' and metropolitan papers. The committee believes that the American public owes a debt of gratitude to the police of New York, Chicago, and many other metropolitan centers for affording protection against the lawless and revolutionary activities of the communists, and in safeguarding foreign consulates from insults and mass communist demonstrations." Lyman B. Kirkpatrick, Jr., Inspector General on the staff of the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, during testimony before the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee said, "Let me describe briefly the history of the communist war against the police in one of the major countries of the free world. This particular country has a long history of excellent police service and a law, dating back many years, requiring that the police force be completely divorced from all politics. Further, until the communist politicians started to create trouble in recent years, there had never been an incident on record showing political interference with the administration of the police force. In this particular nation there is a national police force which has 5 levels, but is organized on a national, provincial, and local basis. The communist technique has been directed primarily toward discrediting the police in the eyes of the people. On the local level, communist troublemakers would start fights in public places in order to involve the local police. When the police went into action, the troublemakers linked arms in an effort to show that it was the police who were causing the incident. The communists will exert every effort to prevent the development of a strong police force. The communist attack on the police of the free world is dangerous for 2 reasons. The first is that the attacks are fanatical, disciplined, and skilled in underground methods. The second, a campaign against the police of one free country is not planned and directed by the Communist Party of that country, it is planned and directed by the strategists of international communism. June 13, 1961. 1. Edgar Hoover warned citizens of police review boards. These panels would consist of appointed individuals who are inexperienced and uninformed in law enforcement and police administration. This drive for external boards is an ill-advised maneuver. Law Enforcement Bulletin. FBI, January 1965. Such a board, with unfriendly motives, could harass a police officer and cause suspension or relieve him of his job. Every arrest by an officer could mean a special review to which he would have to answer any charges by a criminal. Thomas J. Gibbons, former police commissioner of Philadelphia, said concerning one of these review boards, "In 1953 we had 2,000 applicants for police recruits and accepted 1,000. In 1960 things had changed. Hardly anybody wants to be a policeman in my city." Saturday Evening Post. July 9, 1960. The police are our guardians of freedom and therefore are among the first to become the major target of the communists. The more effective the police force, the more vital it is for the communists to destroy it. There is an immediate clash between the police and the communists, and the police become some of the first to learn that the Communist Party is not just another political party, but an international conspiracy. Police are the custodians of freedom for the American citizen. They are the vanguards against the most highly organized band of criminals ever known, the International Communist Party. In 1968 there were 15.8 assaults on police for every 100 officers in this country. This means that 1 of every 7 policemen is being attacked every 12 months. And the horrible part is that the number of assaults on the police increases with each year. The police are being bombarded with rocks, bottles, and bricks, shot at from rooftops, and often hospitalized by wounds from clubs, spikes and meat hooks. There are altogether far too many police horribly murdered while in the line of duty while protecting the average citizen, you and me. Policeman. A policeman is many things. He's a son, a brother, a father, an uncle, and sometimes even a grandfather. He is a protector in time of need and a comforter in time of sorrow. His job calls for him to be a diplomat, a psychologist, a lawyer, a friend, and an inspiration. He suffers from an overdose of publicity about brutality and dishonesty. He suffers far more from the notoriety produced by unfounded charges. Too often, sets of heroism go unnoticed, and the truth is buried under all the criticism. The fact is that less than 0.5% of policemen ever discredit their uniform. That's a better average than you'll find among clergymen. A policeman is an ordinary guy who is called upon for extraordinary bravery for us. His job may sometimes seem routine, but the interruptions can be moments of stark terror. He's the man who faces a half-crazed gunman, who rescues a lost child, who challenges a mob, and who risks his neck more often than we realize. He deserves our respect and our profound thanks. A policeman stands between the law-abider and the lawbreaker. He's the prime reason your home hasn't been burned, your family abused, your business looted. Try to imagine what might happen if there were no policemen around. And then try to think of ways to make their job more rewarding. Show them the respect you really have, offer them a smile and a kind word, see that they don't have to be magicians to raise their families on less than adequate salaries. We think policemen are great. We thank God for all the little boys who said they would be policemen and who kept their promise. We hope you feel the same way, and we hope you'll show it so there will always be enough good policemen to go around. Chapter 4. The Black Belt. The Negro population in America became a target for the communists as early as 1921. The Negroes were to be considered an oppressed colony who should be agitated and terrorized into the semblance of seeking freedom and independence. This official program was laid down in the booklet American Negro Problems by John Pepper, published in 1928. Pepper was an alias of Moscow's agent, Joseph Pogany, who had been one of the top subversive agents in the communist regime in Hungary. He was then directed to the United States to begin work for a Negro revolutionary movement. In his book he wrote, "The Workers' Communist Party of America, in its fight against imperialism, must recognize clearly the tremendous revolutionary possibilities of the liberation movement of the Negro people. The Negro communists should emphasize in their propaganda the establishment of a Negro Soviet Republic." Pepper's basic formula for Negro revolutionaries has been carried down to the present time in what the communists call the Black Belt states. One of the lines used to promote unrest and agitation among Negroes is, "Revolution is not a matter of our own choosing. It is forced upon us by capitalism itself, which degrades us, grinds us down into the dust, makes life unbearable." But Robert Welch said, "The 20 million Negroes in America undoubtedly own more automobiles, more bathtubs, and more television sets and more freedom and more opportunity than all of the Negroes on the continent of Africa and all of the 200 million residents of Soviet Russia put together." But the communists never allow such facts to interfere with their propaganda. Peace marches, demonstrations, or open rioting are all agitated by some form of propaganda. They are either enticed into believing their situation is frightfully pitiful, or that they should demand more privileges in welfare, jobs, or land. In 1921, the Communist International at Moscow instructed American communists to organize and lead the Negro masses. In 1928, Joseph Stalin gave specific directions. The communist goal was to confiscate the property of all whites in the Black Belt region of the American southern states, detach the region from the Union, and establish it as a Negro Soviet Republic. This communist objective has never been altered. It was laid aside in 1941 when Nazi armies invaded the Soviet Union and held in abeyance until 1946. Since then, tactics have been more subtle than before World War II, slogans have changed, and more well-intentioned non-communists, especially clergymen and college students, have been duped into doing the party's racial agitation work, but the goal has remained fixed. Bloody race war in the United States. Dan Smoot Report. February 22, 1965. A well-known and patriotic Negro by the name of Manning Johnson, who once had been a communist agent, wrote a book about the communist plot to use the Negro people in America. He had been duped by their subtle persuasions and witnessed for himself the conniving objectives of the party. After realizing the big lie of communism, he turned back and exposed the communist plots and directives. He said, "To sink their claws in, subvert and use the Negro people, Moscow must have loyal, dedicated, trained Negro professional revolutionists who can easily be manipulated, that is, made to follow the party line. Manning Johnson. Color, Communism, and Common Sense, page 34. Former communist Benjamin Gitlow, picture of Gitlow, describes the coming revolution. Benjamin Gitlow was head of the U.S. Communist Party in 1928. He later was expelled from the party and then made an expose of their conspiracy in America. Here is an excerpt from his article in the Congressional Record on August 7, 1963. Communists and their supporters intend to arouse to a fever heat the nationalist and chauvinist sentiments now finding expression in segments of the Negro population, into a drive for separation of the Negroes from the whites through the establishment of an independent Negro Republic in the United States. The communists are deliberately maneuvering among the American Negroes to create a situation for the outbreak of racial violence to such an extent that it can be turned into a civil war on a racial basis. In such a civil war, should they succeed in fomenting it, the communists hope to so undermine the American government and our social structure that they can take over power. In the racial civil war they envisage, they are sure Negroes will be in the front ranks, the shock troops of the communist revolution. Until recently, the communist policy has been to soft pedal their demand for a Negro separationist movement to oust the whites from the South, expropriate their lands and property, and establish a Negro Republic under communist hegemony. But now the slogan of self-determination for the Negro is in the forefront of the American Communist Party's general program. The communists know where they are going and they are hell-bent on getting there, even if they have to drown the American Negroes in their own blood to get the power they covet. The vast majority of Negro people in the United States are patriotic, and they have a deep love of country and home. Most of them realize the hidden hand that causes havoc among their people, and many thousands of them have been the victims of the violence and rioting. A few others are being trapped into the Communist Party line and are unaware of the real masters they serve. One of the most controversial Negroes of our generation was Martin Luther King. To many he is known as one of the greatest Americans of our age. To others he has been identified and exposed as a fellow traveler of the Communist Party USA. He spoke well of the rights and ideological principles of the Negro people. However, many of his associates, organizations with which he was affiliated, and the manner in which he operated were all very questionable. Alan Stang, author, television writer, producer, and former business editor for Prentice Hall Incorporated, wrote the following commentary on the methods of a non-violent demonstration used by Martin Luther King. It was Sunday morning in Alabama. It was clear. It was cool. It would be a perfect day. And the most wonderful thing about it was that a foreboding, pervasive sense of nonviolence hung heavy in the air, a premonition of nonviolence in the afternoon. Selma was so full of nonviolence it was fit to bust. At one end of the bridge were the troopers, mounted into foot, billies in hand. Nothing much needs to be said about them. Everybody knows, don't they, that all white Alabamians, especially the police, are filled with hatred and police brutality. At the other end of the bridge were the others, meek, innocent, pure, abused. The civil rights fighters. Nothing much needs to be said about them. Everybody knows that they were stuffed with love. They were full of it, crammed with it, there was no way at all you could jam in any more of it. The troopers tensed. The marchers marched. Was this going to be it at last? Were we finally going to get some non-violence going? Most people were basically so peaceful you had to spend such a long time lying before you got any of it at all, and then what you got might not even be decent. For weeks, Newsweek of March 22, 1965, explains, Martin Luther King had been escalating his Selma voter registration campaign toward the state he calls "creative" tension, the setting for a paroxysm of segregationist violence that can shock the nation to action. The Negroes' rationale in holding night marches, explains the New York Times of February 24, 1964, is to provoke the racist element in white communities to show its worst. Believe me, you don't know what work is until you've tried to provoke some nonviolence. And then at last, oh happy days, the troopers were charging across the bridge, kicking and clubbing and tear-gassing. Gosh, it was wonderful. It was great. Man, you talk about nonviolence. Newsweek of March 22, 1965, tells it this way. At a half-walk, half-run, troopers shoved and clubbed the marchers into retreat. Behind them, the sheriff's cavalry mounted a Cossack charge into the scattering column. Cossacks. You get it? You remember the Cossacks? They were the crowd who used to ride down the luckless Russian workers on orders of the Tsar. Later on, the workers made a revolution. You may have heard about it. But Alabama Cossacks didn't do it on orders of the Tsar. The only reason they were there at all, it seems, has that the march had been forbidden because of this very premonition of non-violence by an order from George Wallace, the Ivan the Terrible of American society. Otherwise known as the governor of the one sovereign state of Alabama, if you will pardon the expression. Now, what's the point to all this non-violence? We know it's about civil rights, of course, but why must the non-violence get so bloody? What's the theory behind it? Well, the man behind it is of course the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he tells us about it all in Saturday Review for April 3, 1965. 1. Nonviolent demonstrators go into the streets to exercise their constitutional rights. 2. Racists resist by unleashing violence against them. 3. Americans of conscience in the name of decency demand federal intervention and legislation. 4. The administration, under mass pressure, initiates measures of immediate intervention and remedial legislation. Ladies and gentlemen, here it is from the man himself. Let's spell it out in English. 1. Nonviolent demonstrators, that's anyone who, say, has a pair of sandals and needs a bath, go into the streets to provoke the Hicks. 2. Racists, that's anyone, say, who doesn't have a pair of sandals and doesn't need a bath, finally lose their heads or are simply forced to use violence, as in Selma. 3. Americans of conscience, that's a reader of the New York Times, a professor at Yale, or anybody calling himself a clergyman put under pressure for more federal intervention to promote collectivism that leads to communism. 4. The administration, I don't know who that is, under mass pressure, you know what that is, sends in more troops and passes more laws. In short, and remember that this is from the massive brain of the man himself. The violence that usually occurs in a King production isn't unexpected, isn't to be avoided, isn't something to be sorry about. It is exactly what he wanted. It is the point to the whole production. It is, in fact, says Dr. King, the only reason for a nonviolent demonstration. To generate pressure on the Congress to install more collectivism. As we have seen, the Selma March, for instance, caused the lightning passage of the Voting Rights Bill, under which the federal government, rather than the states, now conducts voting registration. The point being, of course, that in any dictatorship, whether communist or Nazi, all the power must be centralized. So when Dr. King sees the troopers, he isn't sorry. Lando Goshen, no. He's glad the paroxysm is on its way. He loves to see his own supporters get their skulls cracked. You see, when the non-violence broke out in Selma, for instance, the skull of King, as chance would have it, was safe in Atlanta. What does it all mean? What's behind it? What manner of man is Martin Luther King? Well, there are all sorts of opinions. The Reverend Ralph Abernathy, for instance, explained on the Selma March, according to the New Yorker of April 10, 1965, that King was conceived by God. Legend has it, we read in Newsweek of April 2, 1965, that after his conviction for leading the Montgomery bus boycott, Negroes gathered outside shouting, "Behold the King! Long live the King!" A strange thing occurred after the terrors of the rioting in Watts. Martin Luther King, Hawkins, and Imlay came to Watts and called for a police review board to end their police brutality. Associates and friends of Martin Luther King have been an indication, if not an indictment, against King's objectives. One of the most active and widely traveled civil rights leaders is Bayard Rustin. Rustin, who is best known for organizing the March on Washington in 1963, was an organizer for the Young Communist League. During World War II, Rustin spent 26 months in federal prison for draft evasion. In 1953, he pleaded guilty to a sex perversion charge in Pasadena, California. In 1957, while employed as Martin Luther King's personal secretary, Rustin attended the National Convention of the Communist Party. In 1958, while still in King's employ, Rustin went to Soviet Russia to participate in an anti-American propaganda show called the Nonviolent Action Committee Against Nuclear Weapons. Rustin accompanied King in 1964, when King accepted the Nobel Peace Prize. Civil Riots USA, page 13. Perhaps the most popular or publicized picture ever printed of Martin Luther King is the following photograph of his attendance at the Highlander Folk School. Picture at training school for communists. The above picture was made by an employee of the state of Georgia at the Highlander Folk School in Monteagle, Tennessee, during the Labor Day weekend of 1957. The photographer was sent to the Highlander Folk School by the Georgia Commission on Education. The Highlander Folk School was abolished by an act of the legislature of the state of Tennessee at a later date because it was charged with being a subversive organization. Those numbered in the picture are 1. Martin Luther King, Jr. 2. Abner W. Berry, a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party. 3. Aubrey Williams, president of the Southern Conference Education Fund Incorporated, a fellow traveling organization, and 4. Miles Horton, director of the Highlander Folk School for Communist Training, Monteagle, Tennessee. Carl Prussian, a former FBI counterspy, has this to say about Martin Luther King Jr. I further do solemnly swear and attest that 1 Rev. Martin Luther King was always set forth as the individual to whom communists should look and rally around in the communist struggle on the many racial issues. I hereby also state that Martin Luther King has either been a member of or wittingly has accepted support from communist fronts, individuals, and/or organizations which give aid to or espouse communist causes, numbering over 60. While openly preaching nonviolence in Chicago this summer, Martin Luther King and his agents have been actively organizing Negro bands and planning violence. His purpose is to gather $1 million a year from the suckers who contribute to his organization. King gave the closing speech at this convention. Paul Crouch, a former top Communist Party official, told the Congressional Committee. The Highlander Folk School is operated ostensibly as an independent labor school, but actually is working in close cooperation with the Communist Party. SZEF report. U.S. Senate, page 47. Another Negro who has functioned in civil turmoils is Muhammad Kenyatta. Muhammad Kenyatta. The church has long been a focal point for 25-year-old Muhammad Kenyatta. Better known to Chester residents as Donald Brooks Jackson, Kenyatta comes from a background steeped in church activities. Most remember him as a 14-year-old boy preacher discussing the Bible from the pulpit of Chester's Calvary Baptist Church. The soft-spoken Kenyatta is now the Pennsylvania delegate of the National Black Economic Development Conference, which is demanding $500 million in reparations from white churches. He led a takeover of the Robert Wade Neighborhood Recreation Center in Chester last June and was one of the chief spokesmen for the Black Manifesto cause during July's week-long occupation of the Cookman Memorial Church in North Philadelphia. Kenyatta, a graduate of Edison High School here, attended Lincoln University 1 year before serving in the U.S. Air Force. He then attended Williams College near Boston 2 years. The use of rights for wrong purposes may be the means of bringing about the downfall of our republic. A closer look at the Black Manifesto may be very revealing. One editor wrote, "The Black Manifesto is making deep inroads into the churches in the Philadelphia area." The Evening Bulletin, October 6, carried a 3-column front-page headline, reporting that a diocesan committee proposed that the Episcopalians raise $5 million for the Black economic development. The funds are also to be distributed solely by the diocesan black clergymen. The black clergy and the leadership of the Episcopal Church are also a part of the Black Economic Development Conference, and their key leader is none other than Muhammad Kenyatta, the vice president of the Black Economic Development Conference. Kenyatta has also announced the establishment of a Negro publishing house in Philadelphia, which will print the literature for the Black Economic Development Conference, including the Black Manifesto itself. This manifesto calls for revolution, the overthrowing of the United States government, and charges the United States of being the most barbaric nation on the face of the earth. Communism is seeking to use the Negro to destroy his freedom and the freedom of everyone else. Negroes must not be helped to become communists, they must be helped to be Christians. Christian Beacon. October 9, 1969. The Black Panthers are another group of Negroes who have been duped into the enticements of conspirators, said Robert Welch to the members of the John Birch Society. The Black Panthers are not even in the mainstream of the revolution. They are being used by agents of the insiders far above them to beat their breasts and make loud noises, like the guerrillas whom they so much resemble, to commit crimes and provoke resentment over their crimes, and otherwise to make it easier for the insiders gradually to bring into existence a federal police force and carry out many other steps in the name of law and order which lead toward a future police state. 10,000 active, screaming, militant, murdering Black Panthers, with all the publicity and semblance of importance given them by the pro-communist influences in our press, can be extremely useful in creating the desired mood among the American people. And what can we do about it? Why, simply get more people to understand how all these pieces of the puzzle fit neatly into the communist strategy. Don't worry about the Black Panthers, except to keep your local police forces as independent and unfettered as possible, so as to minimize the Panthers' crimes. A patriotic Negro by the name of Donald Jackson wrote an article which, because of its high merits, was inserted into the Congressional Record. He wrote, "I am a Negro who attended college in Mississippi and am the author of 2 books. The editor and publisher of a monthly called Wire magazine. And probably the only Negro manager of a "LET Freedom Ring station in the United States." Why haven't the voices of the intelligent, decent, respectable Negroes of Mississippi been heard? It's heartbreaking to read in the press and to see on television the vicious, untruthful statements regarding the citizens of Mississippi. James Meredith, who now lives in New York City, should try cleaning up the terrible conditions existing in New York and the Negro community. In many areas, it is unsafe for male or female to walk or even ride a subway without being attacked. Representative Adam Clayton Powell Jr.'s district has over 60% of the people living there unregistered and not eligible to vote. The crime rate in New York City in the Negro community is 0.000% higher than the white community and 500% higher than any other in the country. The illegitimacy rate in the Negro community in New York City is 43.41%. The Negro clergy of the National Council of Churches are the Negro people's greatest enemy. You no doubt have already seen where many Negro clergy bleed their members for money. Their sole interest seems to be a fine new church where they can bring other ministers to show off a late model Cadillac and a big salary. The Negroes of Mississippi should check the background of some of the travelers and clergy in the civil rights movement. You will find automobile thieves, bootleggers of whiskey, rapists, pro-communist sympathizers and publicity-seeking hounds, using God's most holy temple to plot evil against his brother, under the guise it is helping the Negroes, when this conspiracy is directed and encouraged by the Communist Party. Any Negro who is a member of a church that holds these hate meetings under the guise that it is for civil rights should boot the preachers out of their church. Many of you have been fooled by the press that the KKK shot James Meredith. Many of you know about guns. Birdshot will kill a bird, but it will take a shot of birdshot at very close range to seriously injure a human being. The liberal press wants you to believe that the man that was supposed to have shot Meredith was plotting to take his life. I'm sure you will have heard that this gentleman called Mr. Meredith twice by his name before firing a single shot. If this man had wanted to kill Meredith, he would have used a rifle. Meredith had his press secretary on hand taking a picture of Meredith hitting the ground. Of the gunman and a clergy praying. It is obvious this whole affair was well planned. You Negroes should tell Dr. King and his group of professional rabble-rousers that the Mississippians can handle their problems without that beatnik trash that comes to the South for the sole purpose of exploiting the Negro and his problems. Congressional Record. August 12, 1966. p. 1723. The heads of the Communist Party are adamant in their determination to subvert whites, Negroes, organizations, and even churches to obtain a revolution in America. The Negro was one of the first objectives of the Communists, and they wrote. Comrades Browder, Edwards, and Ford have spoken about the necessity of making a turn in our Negro work, how to connect ourselves with the organized masses in the United States. There are, of the Negro population, 10 million in churches. The problem of how to penetrate these organizations is of the utmost political importance. Party Organizer, page 16. March 1935, by the Central Committee Communist Party. Former Communist member, Manning Johnson, verified these objectives and he wrote. The Communists try to exploit these national, racial and religious differences in order to weaken, undermine and subjugate America to Moscow. Like a serpent, they use guile to seduce each group. During the 3 decades which have elapsed since the Sixth World Congress in Moscow, the American Communist Party has conducted many campaigns and formed and infiltrated a large number of organizations among Negroes. From the bloody gun battles at Camp Hill, Alabama, 1931, to the present integration madness, the heavy hand of communism has moved, stirring up racial strife, creating confusion, hate and bitterness, so essential to the advancement of the Red Cause. Color, Communism and Common Sense. By Manning Johnson, page 20 and 28. The Communists know that a divided people are easily conquered. They realize that if they can manipulate Americans to fighting Americans, their battle is won. One of the most important projects of our enemies is to create a race war between the Negro against the whites and the whites against the Negro. The principle of the communist game is hatred. The Negroes and the whites of America must not fall into that trap. The blame for riots and revolution must be placed where it belongs, with the agitators and dupes of the communist ideology. How strange indeed are the voices of the revolutionaries and protectors, so often and continually heard, while the patriotic and honorable citizens who voice the truth are hidden in silence. Occasionally a clear voice, amidst the rabble and confusion of a biased press and a garbled news media, rings true and clear. Such were the straightforward, honest feelings of a Negro woman who wrote this letter to Congressman Wayne L. Hayes. So pay attention. I am not a white racist, but a 40-year-old Negro woman who knows what she is talking about, so pay attention. What is wrong with you in Washington? You keep giving the poor more free handouts, when what they need is a job, so they can learn to work and help themselves. Welfare alone has been their ruination. If you give a check or commodities, make them do something in return. If you give education or job training, make them earn it. There are many things that need doing in this country. Roads need repair. Trees on our city streets need trimming. There is litter on the sidewalks. City buildings need painting. Hospitals and nursing homes can always use a little more help. Women on relief could take some foster children. When the children are in school, they could do other volunteer work. Do you people really not know that any human who gets something for nothing loses all pride and initiative? You are completing the destruction of the Negro male by all these so-called progressive programs. Many of those collecting welfare are driving around in big cars and have expensive furs. My husband and I, who are taxpayers, can't afford these things. Why aren't people investigated before they are given charity? Don't tell me we cannot find work for them to do. If I cannot get what I want, I scrub floors, and have done so. My mother taught me nothing was beneath me if it was honest. I am not the only one who feels this way. Many hard-working people, black and white, are getting fed up with this free policy. We are sick and tired of making sacrifices to support those who are too lazy to stand on their own 2 feet. We are not going to stand for it forever. Sincerely, Sadie, Mrs. Emery Willis. East Liverpool, Ohio. Chapter 5. Student Revolt. Give me a child for 8 years, and it will be a Bolshevik forever. Demoralize the youth of the land, and the revolution is already won. Lenin. American universities, instead of becoming institutions of higher learning, are fast becoming spawning grounds for sexual promiscuity, subversion, and treason. Unless discipline is restored and standards of decency and order are respected by the students, our colleges and our streets will become the matriculation centers for revolution. A social phenomenon is occurring within the youth of America which is destroying their standards, their integrity, and their morality. When these are lost, we have lost the foundations of good citizens and a good government. Propaganda on paper, by voice, and in action are fact revolutionizing campuses. Slogans and cliches are molding the minds of the youth. Expressions such as "make love, not war," have evolved into obscenity, pornography, and free love and sex clubs and sexual freedom groups. 4-letter vulgarities are becoming the conversational expressions of the universities. Veteran investigators in the underworld of dope and vice have a difficult time holding on to their stomachs, as well as their sanity, when they are called to duty among the operations of the New Left. Beyond the depravities of the body, they bend the mind with a subversion of their family, their country and all else that is sacred. Some professors have even helped in publicizing and promoting them. The heroes of these dramas are usually depicted as socialist revolutionaries. The villains are capitalist pigs. Actors, sometimes naked or near naked, portray characters in lustful, sadistic, brutish attitudes. The coupling with political propaganda of blasphemous, sacrilegious and vulgar sexual terms used with regard to religious themes and family relationships is a deadly weapon, blatantly used to demoralize and destroy. Another part of the same weapon is sensitivity training, now being promoted on a massive scale in the United States, including on some campuses, notably the University of California. The training consists of creating physical awareness of other persons. It is highly related to such physical contacts as between mother and infant and sexual feelings between persons. The idea is to become aware of the other person through touch and other forms of direct contact. Classes often are conducted in the nude. Congressional Record. March 24, 1969. In 1965, the Senate Internal Subcommittee released a report which revealed the success of communists in infiltrating the student movement in Latin America. Senator Thomas Dodd, vice chairman of the subcommittee, said, "Student riots throughout Bolivia contributed to the overthrow of the American-backed anti-communist government of Dr. Paz Estenssoro. In 1958, communist-led students greeted Vice President Richard Nixon on his tour of South America in Venezuela, where he and his wife were spit on, pelted with garbage, and forced to take refuge in the American embassy. The ideas for the conquest of Cuba was first implanted into the minds of college students. College campuses were particularly fertile soil. Fidel Castro's victory in Cuba in 1959 had shown what could be achieved by a small group of young dedicated followers. Castro's deeds had stirred the imagination of American students already touched with revolutionary fever. They were ripe for indoctrination by communist, pro-communist and liberal professors. There were plenty of these around ready to talk about the evils and injustices of imperialism, capitalism and the American system, and the plight of oppressed peoples around the world. Backup was provided from outside by Communist Party functionaries including Hull himself, making speaking tours of the campuses. Other vehicles of indoctrination were open forums, rallies and teach-ins. The teach-ins were a technique developed from the earlier Communist Front study group to reach larger audiences. Dressed up to look like fair debate, the teach-in was in fact carefully planned, timed and supervised by specially picked discussion leaders to give the organizers the advantage over the invited opposing speakers. Planted strategically about the hall were hecklers armed with prepared questions and statements, versed in the art of stifling the opposition and swaying an audience. It also was no longer necessary to confine activities to the old secret communist cells. Radical students and non-student radicals were enlisted to organize college chapters of now national organizations formed under various banners: civil rights, fair play for Cuba, end the war in Vietnam, stop the draft, academic freedom, everything from free speech to free sex. Hahn. John Rarick. Congressional Record 32469. The communist conquest of China was accomplished in a 5-step program which had been successfully used in other nations. 1. Capturing the student mind. 2. Organizing youth into communist organizations. 3. Exploitation of the group to popularity and power. 4. Revolutionary conquests to obtain power. 5. Control of state and government. Part of the recent erosions of the campus youth begins with sensitivity training programs. This breakdown of integrity within individuals is being introduced with such names as Zen and game clubs and impersonal relations and human potential workshops. Federal funds are being exploited for their promotion, and some states are bringing these classes into mandatory school programs. Subversion is cunning, and it is the misuse of truth and the twisting of facts that bring about the worst form of destructions. Lenin knew the advantages of thwarting the innocent into the pernicious activities of the communist conspiracy. The communist Georgy Dimitrov, who was an instructor at the Lenin School of Political Warfare, said, "Let our friends do the work. The sympathizer is generally worth more than a dozen militant communists." A university professor, who without being a party member, lends himself to the interests of the Soviet Union, is worth more than 100 men with party cards. Congressional Record. August 22, 1958. Student group movements become another effort by communists to draw the college youth into red activities. Their strategy is to involve as many students as possible into demonstrations which will eventually recruit them into their hardcore activities. One former member of the free speech movement described his activities. "A bunch of the communist kids ran over to us and said, 'Let's form a united front.' It sounded great to us. We were suckers. The communists ran the whole show, and we were window dressing to dignify their activities. Then the administration used our participation to deny they were surrendering to communists. It's tough on the ego to admit, but the Reds really sucked us in. We were used." That story is being repeated in nearly every university in the country. As Professor Hardin Jones of Berkeley University said, "The University of California at Berkeley is annually turning out more genuine committed revolutionaries than were previously produced by the Communist Party in the whole nation. I estimate we are turning out more communist revolutionaries than we are engineers. They are going to have a terrible effect on society. A lot of them are going into teaching." Kenneth Goff, who once served as a leader in the Communist Party USA, wrote, "The demoralizing of our youth has long been the dream of the communist world conspirators." William Z. Foster, head of the Communist Party in America, stated, "Our teachers must write new school textbooks and rewrite history from the Marxian viewpoint. On our campuses, we find that tremendous amounts of marijuana, which has been shipped in from the Communist Party Western Hemisphere headquarters in Mexico City, and other dopes which have come in from Communist China, are widely being distributed among our youth. There are many communist groups actively holding forth on the campuses across our land. A few of these have already been declared subversive by the Attorney General and the Committee on Un-American Activities. 1. Edgar Hoover, director of the FBI, said through the ages, the greatest revolutionary force has been the youth of the land. Our enemies know this better than we. In referring to the communist fronts among youth, he stated, they inflict all the sinister purposes of the Communist Party of the United States. They employ the same techniques and have the same objectives, mainly the conversion of our haven of liberty and freedom to worship as we choose, to a godless totalitarian state where the adversaries of democracy can do as they please. Their sinister motives and attacks should be proclaimed in every pulpit and headlined in every newspaper in the land. It is also true that there are at least 1,600 teachers being trained yearly in communist schools. These schools are organized for preparing young men and women for the revolution, but knowing that one of the most fertile fields for activity is that of education. Great stress is put on recruiting teachers into these communist schools, where they are prepared and subtly indoctrinating our youth. Red Shadows, p.616971. By Kenneth Goff. Communist members are now being used as speakers in colleges throughout the country. One of the primary recruiting targets of the Communist Party USA is the youth of America, and the party has continued its intensified program aimed and directed at our youth. The intensity of this program is revealed in a statement made by Gus Hall in March 1963, when he spoke on the party's success in placing its speakers on various college campuses throughout the country. The youth program of the party, he said, is so important that he or any other national leader would go anywhere to meet with young students. Hall concluded that the future depends on the youth. This committee of the Communist Party agreed that the appeal to young people should emphasize 3 current items: peace, civil rights, and employment for youth. 1. Edgar Hoover. FBI 1965 Appropriations, page 39. There has been a considerable amount of activity, especially in and around the colleges, in the first place in relation to the citizens and racial discrimination, as well as for peace, abolition of the House Committee on Un-American Activities and other issues. There is a mushrooming of Marxist and socialist-oriented groups on the campuses in all parts of the country, and we have witnessed the emergence of a new and very successful youth paper, New Horizons for Youth. Communist Appeal to Youth Internal Security Subcommittee of U.S. Senator, April 25, 1961. The tactics of the communist youth activities are to disrupt and detract from the anti-communist movements. Such an effort was accomplished at the hearing of the House Committee on Un-American Activity at San Francisco. On May 13, 1960, a larger mob gathered. When the hearing room was filled, a police officer acting as guard closed the door and announced that no one else could be admitted. The mob in the corridor rushed him. Someone seized the officer's nightstick and beat him on the head with it. Police unrolled fire hoses and turned streams of water on the mob. This moved rioters back from the hearing room, but did not disperse them. When police moved into the mob to remove the leaders, a wild fight ensued. About 400 policemen and 350 rioters were involved. 12 persons were injured. 6 policemen, 2 firemen, and 4 rioters. 64 rioters were arrested. 3, being juveniles, were not charged. The other 61 were released on bail after being charged with inciting a riot, disturbing the peace and resisting arrest. On Saturday, May 14, a crowd of some 3,000 milled around City Hall, 500 of them picketing with signs against the House Committee. U.S. Representative Gordon Shearer, Ohio, was present in San Francisco as a member of the HCUA subcommittee. In a speech to the House, he gave proof that communists planned the San Francisco riots in advance and were on the scene as leaders, in the hearing room and in the mobs outside directing the student rioters. A group of local clergymen who attended the hearings as observers issued the following statement, which they gave as testimony of what took place. More than a dozen ministers were in attendance at the congressional hearings of the House Un-American Activities Committee in San Francisco on May 12 and 13. What we witnessed was utterly fantastic. The shameful demonstration against law and order and against this duly constituted committee of the Congress defies description. It is our certain conviction that this indefensible demonstration against law and order was conceived, planned, and directed by a few hardcore communist agitators. Leaders of the mob included faculty members and well-known leftist lawyers for the Fifth Amendment communists. We were sitting where we were able to observe the giving of instructions by the riot leaders who had gained access to the room. The Daily Californian, which was distributed widely at the scene, gave explicit instructions on how to harass the committee. They were told to laugh out loud. To make the congressman look ridiculous, these well-disciplined mobsters laughed on the dotted line and obeyed their masters to the last jeer. We watched a national committeeman for the party line up a dozen communists near the railing and throw ... invective, abusive language, vile profanity and fiendish charge at the congressman. The students comprising the rear third of the audience stood up on their seats and yelled, jeered, hissed, and scoffed at the congressman. It was almost a complete breakdown of law and order. The only criticisms we have of the police authorities were of allowing this element to make such a mockery out of law and order without jailing every one of the leaders. Student demonstrations are smoke screens to cover up information that might become detrimental to the Communist Party. The news media will often report the demonstration, but give little notice to the information of the committee. I have several times seen one or more of the media come to the question: is the Students for a Democratic Society a communist outfit? In the big, national media, the answer is always an evasion of the question. The usual conclusion is that some communists have naturally been attracted to it, but the SDS is essentially made up of idealistic students who are disturbed by this or that. That's the SDS handout, but better information is available for free. The literature and recruiting material of SDS poses few problems for intelligent analysis. Much of its effort in recent years has drawn a bead on trying to wreck our industrial and research programs that have given us such an advantage in guerrilla warfare in Vietnam. The SDS uses the language of Mao in pretending that the real reason for these programs is our desire to burn and bomb innocent people. The tactics of the SDS are spelled out in Mao's writings. If our youth could get more of the truth about such organizations and more intelligent appraisal of the idealistic propaganda that recruits them, who knows how many that join might have the sense to stay out. But when the media make out that SDS is mainly idealistic, they are virtually recruiting truly idealistic youth to join. Documents and testimony on most such organizations are right at hand. Senate and House committees compile the needed information, little of which ever reaches a large public. When congressional hearings go into communist activities, the communists usually send people to disrupt the meetings, or the witnesses from the communist side will stage a show and make speeches until they are thrown out. As a rule, the press then headlines the antics and the disturbances and has little space left to report what the committee learned in any more than a fragmentary and disconnected way. In short, the communists drag a red herring over the trail of information, and my colleagues of the big press go after the herring like a hungry cat. News is violence, disturbance of the peace, defiance of authority. The Theatrical American Legion, page 52. March 1970. Known communists and their fellow travelers are often given prominent speaking opportunities. These are sometimes innocently done and other times with utmost shrewdness. Recently, Jerry Rubin spoke at the University of Utah. His speech has caused considerable disturbance to some, while to others he was applauded and supported. Similar speeches in the same type of characters are to be found on nearly every campus across the nation. With their beards, robes, and clowning antics, they entertain and amuse, but they are promoting one objective: a breakdown of respect for law, order, and morals. The tragedy of these foul-mouthed treasonous antics within our universities is that they are gaining influence and popularity. Our youth are being lulled by the lullaby tune of the international revolutionary minstrels. Deseret News. Salt Lake City, Utah. Monday, February 9, 1970. YIPPIE chief speaks at U, scoffs courts. Jerry Rubin, one of 7 defendants in the Chicago riot conspiracy trials, called the trial pure intimidation of America's protest movement. He talked to students Sunday in the University of Utah Union Ballroom. Surrounded by hippies and interested spectators, Rubin, who has been charged with conspiracy to incite a riot during the 1968 Chicago Democratic Convention, said he is traveling across the country getting revenge. America's soul is tinged with racism, he charged. Rubin is a leader of the Youth International Party known as the Yippies. The only thing we conspired to do in Chicago was to have long hair. The members of the Democratic Party have short hair. They drink alcohol, we smoke pot, he stated. Rubin, bared and wearing war paint and a headband, said there is no such thing as a fair trial in America. The affair was sponsored by the Associated Students of the University of Utah and 3 other university organizations. Listeners were charged 50 cents admission. Parts of Rubin's speech are as follows. All you got to do to be a judge is go to a costume store. It costs $25 a day to rent these black robes, and you become a judge. And for 5 months, 8 of us had sat in the courtroom on the 23rd floor of the Chicago court building and had our lives in the hands of a Julius. You've got to dig Julius Hoffman. On Thursday, Dave Dellinger was sitting and listening to a witness testify, and when the witness, who was the assistant police chief, lied, Dave shouted out, "BLLSHT, laughter. .. And Judge Hoffman said, "Take that man into custody, laughter," and that night, Dave was jailed. He was put in jail without bail because he shouted out the word BLLSHT, which is probably the most common word in the English language. Laughter. If I write a book about the trial, that is going to be the title of the book, BLLSHT. ... Anyway, I just wanted to tell you what I think of these robes. Reuben rips them into pieces. Here's what I think of courts. Gestures and applause, and jails, and Julius Hoffman, and all the judges, applause, that put black people in jail, that put yippies in jail, that put longhairs in jail. There's over 300,000 people in jail right now for smoking flowers. Roar of laughter and applause throughout these statements. The people who put them in jail are people who wear black robes and think that makes them superhuman, gods or something. And they can decide that another man can spend his life in jail. Well, I make a proposal. All the judges ought to go to jail. Applause. ... I'll tell you what my intent was on crossing the state line of Utah. I just said at a press conference that the yippies are moving their national office to Salt Lake City. Laughter and applause. You're going to get dope, cheers, sex, applause, and riots, more cheers and applause. Eldridge Cleaver is now living in Salt Lake City, laughter and applause, wild cheers. And just let the Salt Lake City police come and find him. Laughter. The Black Panthers are also moving their offices to Salt Lake City, and they're going to integrate the Mormon Church. Big round of applause, whistles, etc. Our crime is obscenity, that's basically the crime. Saying dirty words like FCK or BLLSHT. I mean, every kid's goal should be to grow up and become a criminal. Inciting to riot, that's my occupation. Child molesting, that's what we're on trial for. Whatever technology the pigs have, it's impossible. Because the Panthers are right. But Jesus was also a nigger. Jesus was also black, he was a black nigger. And that's the message we gotta take to every church that says that black people aren't equal. Great applause and cheers. Christianity brought racism to the soul. Applause. And you gotta begin with the church, and you gotta say to the church that you are pagan. You go to hell because its religion is how you live your life, and if you decide that people aren't equal, you're irreligious. What's this BLLSHT about religion? Applause. The enemy is in the White House. Loud applause, whistles and cheers. The enemy's in the churches. We're joining the black niggers, and the niggers are going to take over America. Applause. And the country belongs to the niggers. Well, it is a crazy law, and it is an insane judge, but Spiro Agnew is insane, too. Spiro Agnew is Vice President of the United States. And Richard Nixon is insane, too. He's the President of the United States. Applause. If we all become criminals, then what are they gonna do with us? There'll be so many of us, the law will become obsolete and we'll take over. That's the whole purpose. We're accused of conspiracy. Dig it, conspiracy. This is conspiracy. Conspiracies are beautiful. What does conspiracy mean? It means breathing. We breathe together. That's what a conspiracy is. We're guilty of a conspiracy. We're guilty of a conspiracy to overthrow America. A real conspiracy. The court system is as corrupt as the political system, which is as corrupt as the economic system, which is as the military. The only people I have faith in are the people in this room. But it's only the people in this room that can free us and free everyone else in jail. It's not going to be any judgment apostle judge who gets his money from the citizens that is gonna free us. It's gonna be the young kids of America. And the yippies are all over the suburbs. The yippies are everywhere. The revolution is in the living room. I'll tell you, when this trial is over, I want to be able to turn on television and see Walter bring down that map, and I want to see the University of Utah on fire. Much laughter and applause, cheers. What the revolution is about is our own lives. And we're going to fight where we are, wherever we are, and no threats are going to intimidate us. If I'm put in jail next week for 10 years, I know damn well that the people of this room are going to break down the bars and free me. Thank you. Lengthy applause and cheers, standing ovation. Reuben represented a gang. His partners eagerly plan his trips and his speeches. They are in the audience to cheer and applaud certain words and sentences. With mass psychology, the audiences are played into the emotional twist of agreement with him and his views, whereas they never would have done so as individuals. This is an old tactic to reduce the principles and standards of a group or a nation. Now is the time for men of honor to take the initiative to thwart the purposes of such traitors to our country and our integrity. Representative Leon H. Savage was one voice, at least, that gave protest to such a demonstration. He deserves a pat on the back for the classic letter which should express the attitude and standards of every man in offices of public trust. House of Representatives. State of Utah. Salt Lake City. February 26, 1970. Commissioner G. Homer Durham. State Board of Higher Education. University Club Building. Salt Lake City, Utah. Dear Commissioner Durham, I am very alarmed about the apathy I find among administrators at the University of Utah concerning the recent talk given there by Jerry Rubin. I am very proud of the history of our university, but I feel that bringing to our state such intellectual and spiritual garbage as Rubin represents does our community and state a great disservice. He advocates burning the universities and overthrowing our government. He discusses religious institutions and leaders in the most obscene language. My concern has led to investigation of the reasons he came here, the individuals responsible, and what can be done to prevent public facilities from being used to advocate destruction, revolution, and treason in the future. On February 3, 1970, the Student Affairs Committee at the university held a meeting to approve Jerry Rubin's coming here to speak. A quorum was not present, so a poll of absent members was taken over the telephone. 5 days later, Jerry Rubin was in Salt Lake City. The committee is supposed to be a deliberative body, and I can't help wondering what kind of education and government processes these students must have had, and how well the state legislature would fill its functions if operated in this way. The sponsoring organization for Rubin's talk was reported to be the Vandals. In practice, this seems to mean "pollute the air with foul language" and "pollute the water with LSD." Page 2. February 26, 1970, Commissioner C. Homer Durham. The university president has shown no concern about Rubin's appearance here. The governor has said nothing. The governor had been informed at his prayer breakfast by the governor of Wyoming of what Rubin had said in Laramie 3 weeks previously. He apparently was unconcerned. Neil Maxwell, vice president, seemed not to be concerned when, 3 days before Rubin spoke here, I spoke with him and expressed my disapproval of university facilities being used to tear down what the owners of those facilities, the taxpayers, are trying to build. I would hope that the Higher Education Commission will prevent revolutionaries from using public facilities in Utah to spout their hatred and treason hereafter. In my position on the Higher Education Committee of the Legislature, I will continue to search for educators and administrators who do not vigorously uphold the constitutions of our state and nation, and who do not vigorously oppose such events as the Jerry Rubin Roman Circus. I will continue to expose such individuals and seek to replace them with men of honor and integrity. Sincerely, Leon N. Savage. Representative State of Utah. LHSEW. CC. Governor Calvin Rampton. Utah legislators. Attorney General Vernon Romney. University of Utah President James Fletcher. Vice President Neil Maxwell. Dean of Students Virginia P. Frobes. Chapter 6. Riots and Revolution. Your republic will be fearfully plundered and laid waste by barbarians in the 20th century, as the Roman Empire was in the 5th, with this difference that the Huns and Vandals will have been engendered within your own country, by your own institutions. British historian, Lord Macaulay. The communists can start revolutions at any distance and on any sphere, however, they must have a border entrance for their agents and military enforcements to enter. Without a military access to a nation from the outside, the cause of the revolution is doomed. Today they have an access to this nation through Cuba 90 miles away. The geographical preparations for an American revolution have been accomplished. The communists now labor for an internal overthrow of this country through revolutionaries in every major city. Kenneth Goff, who once labored for this communist revolution, now exposes the plans of this movement throughout schools, churches, and newspapers. He said 1.5 billion human beings are under communist control. 1/3 of the Earth's surface is under that control. Communism is shaking every orderly government and has reached into every nation, he added. He said he wrote 30 years ago that this country would see race riots, blackouts, demoralizing of youth, snipers and life with unfirm foundations. These are planned riots, he said. They will not stop but grow greater. He looks soon for 70 simultaneous riots, and this is the signal for a takeover of the nation. Anarchism is raging the streets of America, he said. It is not the local Negroes rioting, but a well-trained army of Negroes, students, liberal clergymen who are seemingly bent on moving into every community. He termed the riots a conspiracy. The Reverend Mr. Goff said the riots and war demonstrations are paid for and initiated by the Kremlin and communist headquarters in Peking. He said China and Moscow are not at one another's throat. Wichita Eagle. October 29, 1967. The police and federal investigators are also well aware of the secret plots against America. It is no mere coincidence that most of the leaders in recent demonstrations either are or were members of the Communist Party or some revolutionary organization. Nor is it without significance that the pattern of agitation and action neatly conforms to procedures carried out by communists or revolutionaries elsewhere and at other times. Tom Fitzpatrick, Director of San Francisco Police Department. Riots at the University of California in Berkeley were part of a testing operation in the communist program. The purpose of such rioting is to break down law and order, destroy principles, morals, and the society in general. In such a moral, legal, and lawful chaos, the communists organize and provide a restoration, a dictatorship enforced by terror and the threat of death to all objectors. Eldridge Cleaver, a Black Panther leader, instigated several riots and demonstrations in this country. His tactics and activities were unlawful and subversive, so much so that he was under warrant for arrest, but he escaped and fled the country. He went to Cuba and then to Algiers. A reporter for True magazine had an interview with Cleaver while he was in Algiers. Later he told me of his plan to return in secret and go underground as part of a frightening tactic in leading a bloody new revolution. Cleaver can hardly wait to come home, where he wants to foment revolution, lead guerrilla warfare, and take off the head of Senator McClellan. True, page 35, January 1970. Jerry Rubin announced that the Black Panthers had made Salt Lake City their headquarters and that Cleaver was now in hiding in Utah, boasting that the police could not find him. Another militant by the name of Stokely Carmichael, chairman of the misnamed Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, made this public statement. When you talk of Black power, you talk of bringing this country to its knees. When you talk of Black power, you talk of destroying everything in Western civilization. Statement made on August 4 in riot-torn Cleveland. 1. Negroes certainly see that this is the richest country in the world, and they want to share in the wealth. If Negroes cannot enjoy part of that dream, they're going to burn the country down too. We've got to let them, the white community, know that when they arrest one of us in our community, we're going to move to disrupt this whole country. 3. The question is whether or not this country is going to be able to meet their Negro needs peacefully, or whether they will have to move to disrupt this country in order to force the country to speak to their needs. 4. I don't think Black people ought to wait to get the vote. You ought to get together and tell the white man that if you don't get the vote, you're gonna burn down the city. Tell him if we don't get the vote, you're not gonna have a Washington, D.C. Statement while addressing Negro residents in Anacostia. 5. The revolutionary takeover could come about by very simple means. The rioting in Watts began in just such a manner. On August 11, 1965, at 7:45 p.m. Highway Patrolman Lee Minicus made a routine drunk driving arrest involving 21-year-old Negro Marquette Fry. Within 3 hours, autos were turned over, some burned, drivers were stoned, kicked, and knifed. Soon 6,000 rioters kept the night sky blazing with fires. Several hundred stores worth millions of dollars were reduced to ashes. Fire and destruction spread over 20 square miles, while shouting and screaming mobs ravaged homes. Police and firemen were shot at by snipers. 1,000 firemen battled day and night for 5 days trying to control the holocausts. The dead and injured reached well over 1,000. It was an insurrection. Watts had been called a dress rehearsal for the future riots which were to come. The pattern of destruction in Detroit, Washington, Chicago, and Pennsylvania were all the same. Behind each disturbance is the hardcore insurrectionist who labors for a total revolution in America. A lesson that should be heeded by all Americans is that agitators were successful in creating race hatred in Los Angeles, a city that had never been segregated. A city where public facilities are open to all, where education from kindergarten through college is available for anyone willing to take advantage of it, where Negroes, Jews, Japanese, Chinese, Mexicans, and peoples of many other nationalities, races, and religions have worked side by side for decades. This is the city whose police department has won more major awards in the field of law enforcement than any other city in the country. This is where the worst race riot in the history of the United States took place. Civil Riots USA, page 19. Kill the White Devils. This African Negro is one of 20,000 innocent civilians brutally murdered by the White Devil soldiers. Now the white man's day is over. We will kill the white man. We will have the white women for our pleasure. We will smash out the brains of the white babies against the nearest tree. The time to begin is soon. Watch for the sign. Only through the world government can all Negroes find peace. Only through the world court can all Negroes find justice. Only through world communism can all Negroes find equality. Only through bloodshed can all Negroes find freedom. Start a river of blood. Kill the white devils. The communist imprint of revolution was found all over the Watts area. After the rioting had subsided, pamphlets found on the streets left little doubt as to the cause of such a violent revolt. See sample on preceding page. While the fires of destruction were still smoldering and the bodies of the dead were being hauled away, America was offering many opinions as to why these things had happened. The news reporters and the commentators spoke of civil rights, poverty, racism, and other social reasons, but very few ever mentioned communist influences. But the pattern, the programming and the preparations are all the same in every riot. These disturbances were not planned in the year of the riots, but many years before. America is witnessing new elements of demonstrations. Sit-ins, sleep-ins, shop-ins, lie-ins, and love-ins. All of these are enticing and inviting to the youth who venture into them for kicks. The psychology is to create a group unity in action. The movement may be simple and innocent to begin with, eventually moving into themes such as stop the war, police brutality, and civil rights, all of which soon evolve into civil riots. Demonstrators are soon led by agitators, and then the group becomes a mob from which a few bricks are thrown, and then a fire started. With the excitement and pitch moved up to looting and fighting, the innocent demonstration moves into violence and revolution. No one knows these plans better than a former communist. Revolution. It can happen here. What about Los Angeles, Chicago, Long Beach, New York City, San Diego, Bakersfield? Goff explains revolutionary strategy. Many people ask, is it really possible for the communists to take over America, and if so, how would they propose to do it? The answer is supplied by Kenneth Goff, a former communist, now an ardent anti-communist and freedom fighter. The following is taken from the book Confessions of Stalin's Agent by Dr. Kenneth Goff, published in 1948. There are more communists in America today than there were in Russia before the revolution and in Spain before their civil war. Since the so-called dissolution of the Comintern, party membership has increased by leaps and bounds. Following my induction into the Communist Party, I was sent to the Debs Labor School in Milwaukee. This was one of the many communist training centers operating in all parts of the United States. Such schools are usually located in thickly populated industrial sections. The largest one is in New York State. We received instructions every day on how to organize and promote the revolution. How to bore from within existing organizations and lead them toward the left. Gene Dennis told us one evening not to report to school the following day, but to wander around the downtown area of Milwaukee until we received further instructions. I went down to the main business section the next morning and did some window shopping. About 10 o'clock, while gazing in a window, a newsboy tapped me on the elbow and asked me if I wanted to buy a Milwaukee Sentinel. I said no, that I had already read it. He continued to insist that I purchase one, and I ordered him away. He then handed me a copy and said, "Read, comrade." I took the paper and across the top was written in pencil, "Go to Buse Hall." I immediately went there and found many of the comrades had already arrived. More were coming in every minute. When assembled, we were told that if the party ever went underground, it would be necessary to meet this way. We were instructed how to dismantle and assemble mimeograph machines, to print handbills if the party was forced to operate secretly. Then Gene Dennis gave us the blueprint of how to seize a city when the revolution breaks. At that hour, large race riots are supposed to take place in every city of any size. Leaders of these mobs are to be carefully chosen and trained in advance to work on both sides. The disturbances are to be of some extent so as to require sending large forces of police to those areas. While the authorities are trying to quell these riots, picked bands of Reds are to seize the radio and TV stations and telephone exchanges. With the aid of their comrades, who are employed inside, all communication systems are to be instantly crippled or taken over. Flying squads of communists are to seize control of the water supply and shut it off. Also the electrical power and gas. This means that no elevators or streetcars, subways or electric buses would be running. Other buses would be seized. Homes would be without water, fuel, light or telephone. It would be impossible to communicate with friends or loved ones, even in another part of the city. Goon squads of professional murderers would round up the people in the business districts. Men are to be held as hostages in some of the larger buildings. Women are to be turned over to the sex-crazed mobs unless the men surrender. These are exactly the methods used in Russia, Spain and other places where the Communist Party was allowed to organize and come to fruition. They expect to do the same thing in the United States. Bridges, subways and railroad stations are to be blown up and airports seized. Downtown areas are to be isolated from the rest of the city. Sharpshooters and snipers are to be detailed in taxicabs and private cars, which are to be taken over to wipe out the police, soldiers, uniformed persons and known vigilantes. Smoke bombs, properly located in subways, buildings and large stores, are to add to the terror of the people. When night comes, the city is to be in pitch darkness. Murderous bands of Reds will roam the streets, plundering shops and stores, and starting fires in old buildings. This will increase the panic and facilitate the surrender of men. Then, as the morning sun casts its first rays on the community, one will be able to see blood flowing in the streets. The following schemes were outlined as temporary targets and measures of expediency. 1. To completely saturate the public mind with red propaganda so there would be such confusion that the democratic system could not possibly operate. 2. To set up innumerable front organizations for smearing and ruining before the public every man or woman of prominence who dared raise a finger against us. 3. To promote pacifist groups and have them cry out against war in order to keep America disarmed while Russia prepared for world conquest. 4. To create unemployment in the United States by dumping products produced by slave labor on the markets of the world. 5. To create a general strike through communist-controlled labor unions, thereby paralyzing the nation and creating waves of mob violence. When William Z. Foster made a speech in May 1928, accepting the presidential nomination as candidate of the Communist Party, he said, "When a communist heads a government of the United States, and that day will come just as surely as the sun rises, that government will not be a capitalist government, but a Soviet government, and behind this government will stand the Red Army to enforce the dictatorship of the proletariat." This is a bold statement, but 100% true as far as Moscow's designs and Communist Party objectives are concerned. We were told that when the party came into power, a United States of Soviet America would be established. That this nation would be divided into Soviets, with a commissar over each one. When such statements were made in our meetings, it was a habit for all of us to rise with clenched fists and sing lustily. We marched down the streets with our banner unfurled, fighting for bread and a communist world. The bosses all quake at the challenge we hurl. Advance to the USSA. One comrade would then step forward and ask what was to be done with the religious people of the country. We would then quote what Comrade Lunacharsky had declared, namely, "We hate Christians. Even the best of them must be regarded as our worst enemies. All religions are poison. A fight to the death must be declared upon all religions." This is no idle dream. The Communist Party is working methodically and with deliberate precision toward this objective. It can happen here unless we destroy the Red Menace in America. The day is at hand when we shall suffer the same fate as our brethren in Europe. Detroit was another victim of the insurrectionists. More than $1 billion worth of damage was the final tabulation for their disorders. 20 years ago, few people would believe that Americans could be enticed into mass rioting and murders. Mobs fomenting hatred, throwing firebombs, beating and knifing any innocent bystander, or shooting every pedestrian who walked down the street were to be seen. It seems as though a large segment of the whole nation has become sold on the idea that a major internal revolution is the only answer for America's problems. Violence preachers, insurrectionists, and traitors are being countenanced every day in this country. The subversive elements within our own borders are fast becoming more terrible than the military forces of all our enemies. If the enemies of this nation would drop bombs on one of our metropolitan cities and inflict $1 billion worth of destruction, it would mean war. Yet, we have witnessed this very thing happen, and we tolerate it without giving it more than a passing thought a week after it happens. Fire and looting are not the only objectives of the rioters. Leading citizens and police are also targets for communist rifles and bombs. Riots, insurrection, and wholesale destruction are the preparations for the last phase of a national revolution. The following pictures and articles should leave an indelible impression upon the minds of every concerned American. Picture of burned-out neighborhood with caption. "It looked like a city that had been bombed," said Michigan's Governor George Romney after a helicopter flight of inspection. This burned-out area along Philadelphia Avenue, a residential section of relatively prosperous Negro homes, was destroyed when flames set by looters in nearby 12th Street stores spread out of control. Picture of riots and police. Black extremists plot mass murder of government officials. At this very moment, even while you read this, fanatical ghetto guerrillas are circulating plans to liquidate the mayors, chiefs of police, city councilmen, and moderate Negro leaders in dozens of cities across the U.S. If this timetable of terror called Operation Giap, after Vung Gain Giap, North Vietnam's legendary jungle tactician, is set in motion, it could be the bloodiest, wholesale political massacre in our nation's history. Editor's note: Roy Norton is one of the first white men to penetrate the explosive world of the black extremist underground. In early 1968, the 28-year-old magazine journalist passed himself off as a militant leftist and succeeded in gaining entry into the shadowy world of Negro extremists. The most militant black nationalists are planning "GO for broke urban guerrilla warfare against this nation," Norton declared. The entire nation is the target. Cuba, Red China, and several other hostile countries are financing these groups. Unless these plans are thwarted, we can expect to see entire communities beset by sniping, sabotage, and other elements of guerrilla warfare. One of the most bizarre elements in their plot is the battle plan to assassinate government officials, Norton stated. The plan calls for the wholesale assassination of government officials throughout the United States. Victims of the incredible plot are local government officials in major cities. Maps, instructions on security weaknesses, and information on the location of the homes, families, and habits of mayors, chiefs of police, and other lawmen are now circulating through the extremist underground. The plot calls for these murders to be committed in the bloody, deadly mutilate and kill methods used by Mau Mau terrorists against the British in Kenya, Africa. Power plants, police stations, and other local government facilities are being mapped for possible sabotage in the future. FBI Director confirms assassination plot. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover addressed the National Commission on the Causes and Prevention of Violence on September 18, 1968, and told of the existence of a widespread assassination plot against local government officials. Hoover said, "Delegates from several Negro colleges and universities attended a black student conference sponsored by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and held in mid-April 1968 in a southern state. Reportedly, the majority of men and women at this conference were armed with pistols. Among the items discussed at a "DEFENSE workshop at this conference were the following: preparation of maps showing the locations of the homes of mayors, chiefs of police, and similar authorities so they can be eliminated by Mau Mau tactics." Hoover also warned that foreign governments that are hostile to the U.S. are backing extremist black militants. Within the past year, there have been sufficient contacts between militant black nationalists and representatives of unfriendly or hostile countries to indicate a degree of foreign involvement, participation, and influence in the activities of black extremists in the United States. These foreign contacts serve to increase the potential for violence by giving inspiration, encouragement, and support to the revolutionary aims, doctrines, and activities of black extremists in this country. The plundering and looting of a city has very serious power structures, which could result in the plundering and looting of the entire nation. The communist influence is cleverly injected into civil disobedience and reprisals against our economic, political, and social system. 1. Edgar Hoover. FBI Law Enforcement Bull. February 1966. A special grand jury report on the riots in Cleveland, Ohio, reported that this jury finds that the outbreak of lawlessness and disorder was both organized, precipitated, and exploited by a relatively small group of trained and disciplined professionals at this business. They were aided and abetted, wittingly or otherwise, by misguided people of all ages and colors, many of whom are avowed believers in violence and extremism, and some of whom also are either members of or officers in the Communist Party. It is no casual happenstance or coincidence that those throwing firebombs, or bricks, or bottles, or pillaging, or generally engaged in disorder and lawlessness, were in the main young people obviously assigned, trained, and disciplined in the roles they were to play. Nor it is happenstance or even just singular coincidence. 1. That the overall pattern for firebombing and destruction was so highly selective. 2. That the targets were plainly agreed upon. 3. That certain places were identified to be hit, and that certain other places were similarly spared. Few people could believe that revolt and insurrection could occur within the very capital of the United States. If such violence can occur in Washington, D.C., then no city in America is safe from destruction. The Dan Smoot Report. Vol. 14, Number 18, Broadcast 662, April 29, 1968, Dallas, Texas. The Sacking and Burning of Washington. The night Martin Luther King was murdered in Memphis, Thursday, April 4, 1968, Stokely Carmichael was in Washington, D.C. Within a few minutes after the news was out, Carmichael was leading a small gang of Negroes up and down the street, storming into stores, ordering the places closed in honor of King, forcing customers and employees to leave. The gang grew larger and more violent, began smashing windows and looting stores. Negro mobs formed throughout the Negro business district of Washington, and by 9 p.m. the sacking and burning of the Capitol had begun. Carmichael slipped away and disappeared from the streets. All night Negro mobs burned, looted and robbed, assaulted, murdered and threatened wholesale slaughter. Scores of whites, including police and firemen, were beaten, hit by rocks, bottles, clubs. Some were kicked and dragged by gangs of howling young Negroes. Whites were pulled from their cars and stomped in the streets. Motorcycle officers were hauled from their vehicles, stoned and mauled. Police in cruising cars and firemen trying to get to fires were targets. One white man stopping at a filling station to get directions was clubbed, beaten, and stabbed to death. The violence subsided about 4 a.m. Friday, April 5. A few hours later, city and federal officials were meeting with Army people at the Pentagon to discuss the calling out of troops. They decided there was no need for troops. Early Friday morning, controversy arose in the district over the question of whether Stokely Carmichael had had anything to do with causing the Thursday night riot. Carmichael obligingly cleared up that point. He called a press conference Friday morning to announce that he had started the riot and had led the first gang of vandals and looters. Carmichael said, "Let me make clear what happened last night. Last night we led all of those youngsters up and down the street to close the stores in memory of Dr. King. Some of them began kicking in store. We weren't stopping them from kicking in a few windows. We were stopping them from coming out on the streets without guns. When they come out on the streets, we want them to have guns. The only way to survive is to get some guns." 1. Carmichael also gave an interview, via long-distance telephone, to Radio Havana, Communist Cuba's major broadcast facility. In the interview, which was broadcast in English, Carmichael said, "It is crystal clear to us that the United States of America must fall in order for humanity to live, and we are going to give our lives for that cause. More people are now beginning to plan seriously a major urban guerrilla warfare, where we can begin to retaliate not only for the death of Dr. King, but where we can move seriously with this country to bring it to its knees." 2. In closing, Carmichael sent his regards to the brothers and sisters in Cuba, especially Fidel Castro. Shortly after his press conference and interview with Radio Havana on Friday morning, April 5, Carmichael joined a crowd of some 200 Negro students gathered at Howard University, under pretext of holding memorial services for Martin Luther King. Carmichael spoke to the mob, brandishing a gun above his head, urging Negroes to arm themselves and kill whites. The rally broke up, and the 200 Negro students headed for downtown Washington to loot and burn, smashing windshields and windows, stoning cars and white occupants on the way. Officials meeting in the Pentagon began to get scattered reports of looting about 9 a.m. Friday. They did nothing. By 1 p.m. Friday, reports of arson and looting were coming in from all sections. Officials ordered the D.C. National Guard to assemble for drill. By 2:30 p.m. Friday, marauding Negroes were converging on the downtown area from all directions. Police tried in vain to hold them back. Giving way before the mobs, police fell back and watched the looting and burning. Occasionally, a gang of Negroes would haul some white person out of a car and beat him. The Negroes stole everything they could get their hands on, from cough drops to grand pianos. A looting pattern had developed. A small group of Negroes would smash in a storefront, to the mad cheers of the mob. When the police did nothing, looters would storm into the store, with more yelling and wild cheering. Well-dressed Negroes would arrive in late model cars, and the store would be stripped. When the store was emptied, a gasoline-soaked torch would be thrown in to fire it, and another wild cheer would rend the air. Stores owned by Negroes were, for the most part, untouched. They were identified with soul signs, or with pictures of Martin Luther King bearing the caption "Our Militant Leader." A regular Washington policeman said, "I think we could have stopped this thing if they hadn't put us under wraps. So Looters would break a window, then stand aside to watch our reaction. When we did nothing, the mob would move in and ransack the place. We just had to stand there. 3. One white merchant helplessly watched Negro hoodlums ransack his liquor store, guzzling the stolen whiskey on the sidewalk in the presence of police, smashing the empty bottles through windows or against passing police cars or fire equipment. The merchant asked a police officer standing idly by to stop them. The policeman said he had to wait for orders. 4. Negro gangs looted and burned within 2 blocks of the White House. All up and down Pennsylvania Avenue, from the White House to the Capitol, stores were hit. Shoppers and employees in big department stores screamed in terror as Negro gangs smashed windows and swarmed in looting, mauling, threatening, and shouting obscenities at whites. Negro teenagers, carrying stolen goods, ran in front of the White House, taunting police and guards, sneering, "Why did you shoot us?" At 4:03 p.m. Friday, April 5, President Johnson, at the request of the Negro mayor of Washington, finally ordered troops into the city. But by then, the capital of the United States was already paralyzed and burning. Traffic jams, resulting from terrified whites trying to flee the district, made vehicular movement on most streets impossible. Hundreds of fires raged out of control in many areas. Fire equipment could not get to the fires. When they could move, they were under such heavy attack, from Negroes throwing bottles, rocks, and bricks, that they had to withdraw and wait for police protection. The police, still under orders not to use their weapons, had been told to ignore looting and arson and to concentrate on protecting firemen. Even this role they could not perform because they too were under attack and fell back, under orders, to avoid the necessity of using force against the mobs. So Washington burned. Streets were so clogged with abandoned loot, collapsed buildings, and stalled traffic that National Guard and Army troops, ordered out at 4:03 p.m. Friday, were not substantially deployed in the city until Saturday morning. And they moved in with unloaded guns. They, like the police, were ordered to ignore arsonists and looters. The first troops to arrive set up machine guns around the White House and the Capitol. Johnson, hoping to give minimum offense to Negro rioters, ordered the machine gunners to conceal themselves behind shrubbery. The White House, the Capitol, and the home of the mayor of Washington were protected. Elsewhere, where Negro mobs were permitted to assault, loot, and burn almost at will even after troops arrived. Many reporters took refuge at the White House, considering it the only safe place in town. The mayor proclaimed a curfew, effective at 4 p.m. Friday, but it did little good. Gangs of young Negro men swaggered down the streets, threatening, frightening, or molesting whites, stealing whatever they pleased. Negro women walked through downtown Washington carrying sacks of rocks to throw at police, firemen, white civilians, and store windows. Police stopped Stokely Carmichael strolling through a riot section in violation of the curfew. He told them he did not know the curfew was in effect, and they let him go his way. By Saturday night, April 6, some 14,000 troops and policemen were deployed in Washington. Still under orders not to shoot, they were eventually permitted to use tear gas, and by late Saturday afternoon, they were making thousands of arrests. Sunday morning, April 7, many parts of Washington looked like a city leveled by enemy bombers. Whole blocks of buildings were burned out shells, hundreds of people were homeless. Many small businessmen had lost everything they had, and their employees were jobless. 7 persons were known to be dead, but, for days after the riots ended, bodies were being found in burned buildings. Not until Friday, April 12, 8 days after rioting began, did the mayor of Washington broadcast that all was clear and the troops were leaving. By then, 645 buildings, 283 housing units, 209 commercial establishments, and 8 public or institutional establishments were listed as damaged or totally destroyed. The building damage alone in Washington was estimated at $13.3 million. No estimate has been made of loss resulting from burning and looting of the contents of buildings, personal and commercial property, equipment, fixtures, machinery, and so on. 5. Injured treated at hospitals during the riots totaled 1167, persons arrested, exclusive of juveniles, totaled 7364. Approximately 10% of all those arrested were employees of regular agencies of the federal government. This does not include an unknown number of persons drawing salaries from poverty war agencies financed with tax money by the federal government. There was no indication that any of the arrested government employees would lose their jobs. It seemed fairly certain that those charged felonies would be handled, if at all, on charges reduced to misdemeanors. A 1966 law makes it a felony, punishable by 10 years in prison and a $10,000 fine, for anyone in the district to incite or urge a riot that results in personal injuries or property damage of $5,000 or more. Yet, nothing has been done about Stokely Carmichael. The D.C. Public Safety Director says the matter is under investigation. But it is known in Washington that Attorney General Ramsey Clark does not want to prosecute Carmichael. 6. Clark helped devise the humanitarian technique of riot containment used in Washington. He has congratulated troops and police for the restraint that enabled them eventually to contain the riot without doing much harm to rioters. He hopes the technique will be used in other cities hit by Negro riots. Washington officials claim that police and military restraint saved Washington from a bloodbath. 7. Whose blood was spared? The blood of the arsonist, vandals, thieves, and assorted thugs who destroyed the homes and businesses of others caused an unknown number of deaths and injured more than 1,000. If Washington's streets had been bathed with the blood of some of the savages who sacked the city, it is most unlikely that Washington would have another riot. If it were known that maximum deadly force would be used against rioters in all cities, rioting would stop. Panicking in the face of mob violence, the House of Representatives, on April 10, passed the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which contains an open housing section, eliminating the right of people to manage and control their own property. Now, the Reverend A.D. King announcing that he will carry out the plans of his communist-fronting dead brother to lead a poor people's march on Washington this spring and summer say, "We are going to Washington not to request and not to demand, but to command the Congress to do something. In the past we have asked for crumbs, but now we are asking for the whole loaf." 8. If we do not vote out of office every member of Congress who supports or yields to the outrageous demands of Negro agitators, our nation is doomed. Anarchy is growing at such a pace that we may not have another chance if we do not turn the rascals out this year. For that reason, I urge all of you to get, and pass on to others, copies of our comprehensive 28-page record of the 90th Congress, which shows how every member of Congress stands on civil rights and poverty war measures which encourage and reward the militants, agitators, and hoodlums who are destroying our civilization. Footnotes. 1. Killing stirs looting in part of D.C. The Wash, D.C., Evening Star, April 5, 1968 pages. A1, 7. 2. Article by Jeremiah O'Leary. The Wash, D.C., Evening Star, April 12, 1968 PA 9. 3. U.S. News and World Report, April 22, 1968 page 33. 4. Special Report. We don't have a business. The Wash, D.C., Sunday Star, April 14, 1968 PA 8. 5. AP article, The Dallas Morning News, April 13, 1968 PA 10. 6. Article by Roland Evans and Robert Nierk, The Dallas Times-Herald, April 22, 1968, PA 20. 7. Article by John Vizca, The Wash, D.C., Evening Star, April 12, 1968 pages. A1, 6. 8. Quotes in the news The Dallas Times-Herald, April 22, 1968 PA 2. Communist crusaders are at our doorsteps. They have an objective and they live and breathe to fulfill that goal. Americans can shrug off any thought of a revolution, as most of them do, but the insurrectionists have not lost any ground in their final diabolical mission. They now freely speak of it, they publish it, and they have demonstrated it in the ashes of our cities. Robert Williams, who fled from the United States to avoid prosecution, wrote a pamphlet entitled The Crusader. The publication was published by him in Cuba and then distributed around the USA. The Crusader. Monthly newsletter. Robert F. Williams, publisher in exile. Vol. 5 No. 4 May-June 1964. USA. The Potential of a Minority Revolution. When the brutally oppressed Afro-American speaks of violent resistance to savage racial dehumanization, he reaps a whirlwind of reasons and causes why such a reaction supposedly is insane and suicidal. There is no end to the stereotyped polemics and heated opposition that becklets a rational and objective discourse on the subject. From the camps of the rabid white supremacy power structure, the fellow traveling white liberal and the mercenary running dog Uncle Tom, any individual who raises such a question is labeled a bloodthirsty crackpot, not worthy of social acceptance in America's democratic and Christian society. Proponents of the peaceful transition philosophy are quick to evoke the Gandhian theory of appealing to the conscience of the brutal oppressor and conquering him with the power of nonviolence and love. Let them remember that the anti-racist, anti-imperialist forces of the socialist camp are growing more powerful every day. We are learning from the people of Vietnam. We are learning from the people of Cuba. We are learning from the people of Algeria, Angola and the Congo. This year 1964 is going to be a violent one. The storm will reach hurricane proportions by 1965, and the eye of the hurricane will hover over America by 1966. America is a house on fire. Let it burn, let it burn. The Monroe explosion came prematurely because of our shift in emphasis from self-defense to publicly overemphasizing nonviolence. A 6-year effective campaign terminated an ill-fated untimely experiment with nonviolence. We had enough force and arms to reduce the city to ashes. The white supremacy masses must be forced to retreat to their homes in order to give security to their individual families. Gasoline firebombs, Molotov cocktails, lyre acid bombs, made by injecting lyre acid in the metal end of light bulbs, can be used extensively. During the night hours, such weapons, thrown from rooftops, will make the streets impossible for racist cops to patrol. Hand grenades, bazookas, light mortars, rocket launchers, machine guns and ammunition can be bought clandestinely from servicemen anxious to make a fast dollar. Gas tanks on public vehicles can be choked up with sand. Sugar is also highly effective in gasoline lines. Long nails driven through boards and tacks with large heads are effective to slow the movement of traffic on congested roads at night. This can cause havoc on turnpikes. Derailing of trains causes panic. Explosive booby traps on police telephone boxes can be employed. High-powered sniper rifles are readily available. Armor-piercing bullets will penetrate oil storage tanks from a distance. Phosphorus matches, kitchen matches, placed in air conditioning systems, will cause delayed explosions which will destroy expensive buildings. Flamethrowers can be manufactured at home. Yes, the US government has sunken to the level of devil of the world. The same racist savages whose bombs blow the heads off black babies in Birmingham, USA, who viciously club pregnant Afro-American women into insensibility on the streets of America, are the same beasts who murder, torture and maim the patriots of Vietnam. It is the height of man's inhumanity to man when a slave is sent to extend his master's brutal slavery to his brothers. Afro-American soldiers themselves are being slaughtered like wild beasts on the streets of the so-called free world of racist America. Yet they are being sent as aggressors against the anti-racist, anti-imperialist, peace-loving people of Vietnam in a fraudulent crusade of containing communism. Throughout racist America, our people are being terrorized, murdered, maimed, bombed, lynched, raped, starved, sterilized by the states and imprisoned. Our people have reached a new revolutionary fervor. Our method of struggle is fast developing in the nature that oppressive besets understand and respect. Not only does freedom require the will to die, but it also requires the will to kill. We believe in the right of armed struggle. We believe in the people's right to defend themselves in Vietnam as well as in Harlem, New York or Jackson, Mississippi, USA. We proudly hail the nuclear achievements of the staunch defenders of the oppressed, our Chinese brothers, in developing weapons for self-defense against nuclear intimidation by the racist USA. Our people, who have for many generations been defenseless victims of monopolized white supremacy terror, consider the Chinese bomb a people's bomb, a freedom bomb of the oppressed. Our principles, our love for humanity demand that we place ourselves on the aid of the Vietnamese people. As a representative of the Revolutionary Action Movement, I am here to give support to the Vietnamese people in their struggle against U.S. imperialist aggression. We are opposed to the barbaric acts of the hypocritical Johnson administration at home and abroad. Our human decency will not allow us to predify and serve as spineless apologists for savage Yankeeism. Not only do we condemn, protest and raise our fists in indignation at these brutal crimes perpetrated against the noble patriots of this gallant land, but we promise our brothers, and let the whole world bear witness, that we shall intensify our struggle for liberation in the so-called free world of the racist U.S. We shall take the torch the streets of America, and we shall set the last great stronghold of Yankee imperialism ablaze with our battle cry of freedom. Freedom. Freedom now or death. The Johnson administration is a racist, imperialist administration, desperately trying to conceal its inherent dishonor in a deceptive cloak of so-called representative democracy. Wherever it can, it thrusts its imperialism deceptively upon the deceived through phony aliases for progress, Peace Corps, aid programs, military pacts, phony democratic slogans, Yankee dollars and chewing gum. Wherever it can, it hides its brutal and evil racist face behind a clever facade of mercenary Negroes. It stages a repulsive parade of hand-picked Negro puppets, Judases and apologists for the system before the world to extol the virtues of a fabled representative democracy for a government that respects the human rights of colored people, less than those of common street dogs. Every family in America must hold a copy of this communist document of strategy for civil war. If every American would read it, the fight would soon be won. Notice. This brochure is printed in Cuba by Robert F. Williams, a communist who fled the U.S. to avoid kidnapping arrest. It is being sent to Canada, where it is remailed to communist distribution points in the U.S. for dissemination to NAACP, core and Muslim groups. Tens of thousands were distributed in the Watts area before the uprising. Inform your fellow Americans about the communist-directed racial disorders in our nation and its base of operation. Order copies from Soldiers of the Cross, Box 116, Englewood, Colo. Published in Cuba as a private publication. Political and international policies are all to be maneuvered or controlled into communist programs. Although revolution is becoming a national reality, the vast armies and sabotagers are to take a part in a total war to overcome all opposition. Dmitry Zimanulsky, in a speech before the Lenin School of Political Warfare in 1930 said, "War to the hilt between communism and capitalism is inevitable. Today, of course, we are not strong enough to attack. Our time will come in 20 or 30 years. To win, we will need the element of surprise. The bourgeois will have to be put to sleep. So we shall begin by launching the most spectacular peace movement on record. There will be electrifying overtures and unheard of concessions. The capitalistic countries, stupid and decadent, will rejoice to cooperate in their own destruction. They will leap at another chance to our friends. As soon as their guard is down, we shall smash them with our clenched fist." Patterns of Communist Espionage, Committee on Un-American Activities, 85th Congress, January 1959, page 1. This Dmitry was one of the representatives to the United Nations for bringing peace to the world. Well-informed people are aware of the communist plot to destroy America. Dr. Fred Schwartz wrote, "When they have Eastern Europe, Asia and Africa, then and then only, they will overrun Western Europe. This may be accomplished by telephone, or it may need a little action, but with all Asia and Africa gone, Western Europe will have little will to fight. The world would then be divided into two hemispheres, one with 2,000 million, the other with 300 million. You can imagine what would happen then. After he has the whole of Europe, Africa and Asia, he will unleash up to 1 million aircraft against this country. From the north, from the south, from the west and from the east they will converge, manned by suicide pilots with no expectation of returning, and they will devastate this country within a few days." Communist Interpretation of Peace, page 17. Two other quotes follow, showing the awareness of some in regard to communist programs. "Soviet Russia is growing in strength each day," General Sasha Korotkov boasted. "When the time is ripe we will strike, comrade. In one day we will wipe out all the American war bases from Spain to Alaska." He drew in his breath sharply and added, "And on the very same day the 100 most important Americans will die. Some of them will be poisoned, some crushed under falling rocks, some in unavoidable automobile accidents. The sooner these American exploiters, these bloodsuckers of the poor, are liquidated, the better. My 10 years as a counterspy." Boris Moros. Russia is the shining example of a small well-organized group taking over a country, and the lessons have succeeded in China and the Balkans. 4 conceptions using the school's phraseology for an insurrection are preparation, timing, knowledge of tactics, and complete surprise. Though loyal to the communist world capital and well-instructed, the local leaders still will be amateurs, and Moscow prefers to send experienced revolutionaries to take charge and avoid disastrous bungling and over-leniency. Like the party policies and the life of a party member, nothing is left to chance or to personal vagaries, but is planned in advance on party principles and experience. High points in the plan for the capture of Chicago when the time comes sound like an army operation, with everything provided for from psychological warfare to dropping paratroopers. The peaceful preparations go on for years through capable party members burrowed into trade unions, public offices, police forces, liberal clubs, and other sources of information. Vital spots such as power plants, radio stations, and airports must be mapped. All the working masses and unorganized proletariat may not be aroused to join in the fracas, but the needed knowledge of where to attack to paralyze the city will be at hand. Even recording such a small detail as whether a watchman has a dog is called for in the instructions. A headquarters, known only to a selected few, will be set up, a courier system organized, Telephone talks will be in code, party papers or names memorized and destroyed. Until the 0 hour, non-party friends should be used as blinds in communications written on borrowed typewriters. Police forces are notoriously unreliable for insurrections. Consequently, the city's riot squad sure to put up a fight is studied. If it is on 3 shifts, the weakest one is picked for the attack. Once the police officers are alert to what is brewing, the advice is to telephone them on a phony pretext to learn whether they are home or on duty. The habits and daily routine of the chief must be learned. A blacklist is to be prepared of politically undesirable citizens for summary liquidation or temporary use, while their families are held as hostages. Squads are assigned to capture each objective. Getting names is easy in the United States. The hour and minute when the groups will strike simultaneously will be the final instructions. To prevent calls for outside help, communications will be interrupted immediately. Railroads are to be wrecked several miles outside the city, either by sending out Maverick locomotives or by blowing up incoming trains. Armed men will hold the airports. Captured radio stations will order a general strike, which will be easy if the power plants are seized. The mayor, chief of police, and other officers and leaders are to be captured early. If the mayor refuses to read the proclamation which must be prepared for him, he can be disposed of on the spot, and somebody with a similar voice, already selected, can read it. According to the time schedule, a city like Chicago should be captured in less than 48 hours. By that time, the insurrectionists will have all the weapons and can arm more supporters. They are to proceed to setting up the government from officials picked in advance. Prepare for the storm, page 29-30. By William Culgren. 3 Manhattan skyscrapers ripped by powerful bombs. New York, UPI. Powerful bombs ripped through the offices of major corporations in 3 mid-Manhattan skyscrapers early today, shattering walls, windows and plumbing. The circumstances and results of the bombings were very similar to another triple bombing last November 11 that hit other offices in Manhattan, a police official said. A typewritten message taking credit for the bombings was delivered to United Press International by special delivery mail shortly after 7 a.m. It was signed Revolutionary Force 9. The message read, "In death-directed America there is only one way to a life of love and freedom, to attack and destroy the forces of death and exploitation, and to build a just society revolution." Deseret News, front page. March 12, 1970. Body, bomb fragments found. New York, UPI. Pieces of human bodies and part of a bomb mechanism were found Sunday in the rubble of a Greenwich Village townhouse demolished 10 days ago by dynamite blasts. Newsweek magazine reported Sunday the explosives that leveled the building police have called a bomb factory were to have been used by radicals to bomb Columbia University and other buildings. Newsweek magazine reported Sunday about a dozen young radicals were in the house plotting to bomb Columbia and other buildings when the dynamite exploded. Newsweek said they had come to New York from Boston, Chicago and elsewhere. It said they planned bombings to pressure Columbia into providing bail money for 12 of 13 Black Panthers on trial here now for another bomb plot. Deseret News, page 2a. March 16, 1970. These new revolutionary tools are a little more difficult to operate than the former mimeograph machines. Bombings linked. Copley News Service. Washington. The Senate Internal Security Subcommittee will investigate links between Fidel Castro's communist regime in Cuba and the wave of violence and bombings in the United States. Chairman James Eastland, D.Miss, has charged that nearly 1,000 youths who have visited Cuba in recent months, ostensibly to help cut that island's sugarcane, have been indoctrinated and trained to attack and destroy our institutions and our government. 2 radical leaders killed recently with 3 others in the apparently accidental explosion of homemade bombs in New York City and Maryland had visited Cuba, Eastland told the Senate this week. He also said many of the leaders of the hippie and anti-Vietnam movements have been guests of the Castro government. He cited Jerry Rubin, David Dellinger and Tom Hayden of the CHICAG07, Mark Rudd, a leader in Columbia University's riots, Kathy Boudin and Catherine Wilkerson, who were named as participants in the Chicago riots, Yvonne Bond, listed as a leader in the Berkeley riots, and Robert Collier, convicted for his role in attempting to blow up the Statue of Liberty and indicted on other similar counts in New York. Theodore Gould and Ralph Featherstone, victims of New York and Maryland bomb explosions, also had visited Cuba. Featherstone and a companion were killed when a bomb went off in their car near Bel Air, Maryland, scene of H. Rap Brown's riot trial. Gould and 2 others were killed when dynamite exploded in the basement laboratory of a New York townhouse. What a whirlwind we have reaped from their visits to Cuba, Eastland said. Ponder the dark and bloody results which could flow from 1,000 of these people, spread like a stain across our land. Deseret News. Wednesday, March 18, 1970. America was alerted over 25 years ago. 1. In 1926, R.M. Whitney wrote a book which exposed the Red Plot and all its major ramifications. It was profusely illustrated with documents seized from communist sources by federal authorities. The most colossal conspiracy against the United States in its history was unearthed at Bridgman, Michigan, August 22, 1922, when the secret convention of the Communist Party of America was raided by the Michigan Constabulary, aided by county and federal officials. 2 barrels full of documentary proof of the conspiracy were seized and are in possession of the authorities. Names, records, checks from prominent people in this country, instructions from Moscow, speeches, theses, questionnaires, indeed, the whole machinery of the underground organization, the avowed aim of which is the overthrow of the United States government, was found in such shape as to condemn every participant in the convention. It is now known and can be made public to what extent this movement, inspired from Moscow and directed by Lenin and Trotsky, has grown since the first seeds were sown a few years ago. 2. The following racial program was read to a meeting of assembled communist leaders in Bridgman, Michigan, on August 20, 1922. The Reds proceeded with this program, in spite of exposure, and have accomplished practically all of their objectives. Today we see the tragic effects of public and official indifference. Communist stump preaching and red mimeographing are now operating on larger scales in the United States. Sign carrying and philosophical debates are being replaced by Molotov cocktails and high explosives. The number of communists in America has reached a sufficient force for national destruction. Fires and bombs are spreading the final messages of communism in America. Chapter 7. America Beckons. These people of the United States are the rightful masters of both Congress and courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who pervert the Constitution. Abraham Lincoln. During the most crucial hours of the American crisis in the war with the British, Thomas Paine was penning that the cause of America is in a great measure the cause of all mankind. This is more assuredly true today than any previous time since 1776. If America should become bathed in the blood of a revolution and anarchy, it will sink the hopes of millions of slaves under communist rule. For all the world, the downfall of the American Republic would be the final curtain in the drama of human liberty. Dictatorships and totalitarian statism have tarnished the earth with more slave labor camps, torture chambers, and wholesale slaughtering than all of the primeval savages combined. Such oppressions are always in the name of humanitarianism or socialism. Such archaic systems of government need war to survive. For their existence, it is necessary for them to loot and plunder and rape other nations of their prosperity. Socialism, Bolshevism, statism, or communism is nothing more than gang rule. Capitalism is free enterprise, a fertile foundation for the rights of individualism. Men who are free are the only people who have the incentive to produce, to progress, and to accomplish a thriving business with an abundance. Meanwhile, back at the Soviet ranch, in 1917 there were only a few thousand crackpots dedicated to the idea that they were going to disrupt and supplant every other government in the world. In 50 years and over the bodies of millions of people, they have ruthlessly hoisted their red banner over 1/3 of the Earth's surface and enslaved nearly 1/2 of the total world population. We are faced with the truth that for every American, there are over 6 people who are being trained and indoctrinated with one objective in mind: to destroy and rule over the United States. The communist is as trained and dedicated as any kamikaze pilot. Billy Graham said that in France a French communist spoke up in a university there and said that if the communists told me to kill my mother, I would kill her without batting an eyelash. Whatever the party demands of its subjects, that is what is done, and they are all dedicated to the annihilation of every freedom-loving American. The enemy has us outnumbered. They are often better informed and act with deeper dedication to their cause than we do to ours. They are mass-producing weapons, tactics, and armies, while we are spending and giving away billions of dollars, begging peace, and fighting no-win wars. To the Communist Party there will be no peace on earth until they have overcome all opposition. The Reds will proceed with any means and at any cost to attain this objective. This enemy is vicious, his methods of operation are horrible, and he is not beneath murder individually or by the millions. Ilya Ehrenberg, the Soviet writer, said that if Stalin had done nothing else throughout his life but write the names of his innocent victims, his life would not have been long enough to finish the job. Khrushchev was a worse terror, but it was Mao Zedong who has gained the greatest distinction of all by murdering more than any other ruler. If the Red Mongolian barbarians of Russia and the heathen communist Chinese should prevail in America, they have boasted that they will kill 70% of all the adult population. Several years ago there fell into the hands of our government some secret documents which contained a communist timetable for world revolution. One of the items said, "No war with the United States until after 1970. The United States must be isolated by all possible means. The defensive and offensive preparations of the Soviet Union and China must therefore be completed before 1970. Plans for economic collapse of capitalistic countries. As a final goal, there should be in East and South Asia, after these are conquered, 25 million well-trained men who can be immediately mobilized. These men are to be held in readiness for emergency. They will force the capitalistic countries to keep on increasing defense expenses until economic collapse overtakes them. The communist rulers are building armies for a final war. They are at present undermining and corroding the structures of freedom and economics within our own country. They also tediously labor to undermine every other aspect of liberty and morality in America." Last October 13, Moscow's Pravda announced that fighting against the anti-communist organizations was one of the most important tasks presently facing the international communist movement. Nearly 2 weeks later this same announcement was repeated in the Communist Daily World here in this country. This is accomplished by their operating in or controlling over legitimate and lawful organizations. There are hundreds of Communist Front organizations and many more that they are attempting to overtake. Former FBI agent Smoot reported that interlocking directorates. The NAACP was in 1909. Its first 5 top officials were well-known socialists, one of whom, W.E.B. Du Bois, later became a militant communist. In 1936, communists began infiltrating the NAACP. By 1956, at least 77 top NAACP officials were known to federal agencies as participants in communist or pro-communist activities. The Southern Conference Educational Fund, a powerful civil rights organization, has helped finance and establish several other groups. The Joint Legislative Committee on Un-American Activities of the State of Louisiana revealed, in a report published April 13, 1964, that the SEF is controlled and managed by communists. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which has incited much racial violence, particularly among college students, is substantially under the influence of the Communist Party, according to the Louisiana Joint Legislative Committee. The committee reported that Martin Luther King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference is also substantially under the control of the Communist Party. King, foremost personality in the civil rights movement, is notorious for his association with communists, communist fronters, communist organizations, and moral degenerates connected with communist causes. The Congress of Racial Equality (CORE) has, perhaps, directly instigated more racial violence and civil disobedience than any other civil rights group. On May 25, 1961, U.S. Senator James O. Eastland, Mississippi Democrat, chairman of the Internal Security Subcommittee, reported, "From investigation and examination of the facts and records, there can be little doubt, in my judgment, but that this group CORE is an arm of the communist conspiracy. They are agents of worldwide communism. The National Council of Churches has become a militant racial agitation group. At least 658 officials of the NCC have Communist Front records according to a 310-page book, listing names and records, published by Circuit Riders Incorporated, 110 Government Place, Cincinnati 2, Ohio, $4. The American Civil Liberties Union, very influential in the civil rights movement, was founded by communists and socialists. At least 9 prominent officials of a clue have been linked with communist fronts or with communist activities. At least 4 officials of the National Urban League, oldest civil rights group, have Communist Front records. The American Jewish Congress is militantly active in the civil rights movement. Rabbi Stephen Wise, head of the AJC for years, was associated with about 40 communist fronts. Communist subversive lists continue to increase, and there are at the present time over 1,000 subversive organizations in the United States. The communists boast that they have hardcore members in nearly every business, labor union, fraternal organization, religion, and governmental agency in America. The United States is becoming tainted with traitors, socialist dupes, and fellow travelers of the communist ideology. All of them believe earnestly that they are working for a grand triumph of humanitarianism, so that when the red flag is flown over America, they will have the finest positions and reap the choicest fruits of this country. There is one pertinent fact which is seldom discovered by people who become traitors for the Soviet cause. That among the very first people to be destroyed after a revolution are those who betrayed their own country. The leaders of communism know that a man who is a traitor to his own country would betray another. Once a person proves to be a traitor, he can move easily into that position again. The Red Army will be the force to bulldoze the bodies of traitors into the trenches with the very people they labored so diligently to betray. The greatest fear of a communist is exposure. He works by deceit, subterfuge, and lies to attain his objectives, but when he is exposed, his plans are frustrated. The communist operates by blackmail, bribery and smear tactics, and only when these fail will he resort to violence. If he is exposed, his efforts are shown to be a fraud, and his avenues are easily blocked. An awakened America would be deaf to a communist revolution. The tenuous teeth of the enemy have been gnawing into the vitals of America. We are stumbling in judgments, we vaguely discern our dangers, and we falter at the approaching perils. We are losing the spirit of victory, we blunder in political and international affairs. Today there is in America a public apathy that tolerates traitors, mocks at patriotism and religion, and allows riotous destruction and assassination. We are being brainwashed by delusive enemies from within and barbarians from without. The time has come for Americans to take a good look in the national mirror and shape up to our responsibilities. Every civil servant from the president to the post-hole digger is required to swear allegiance to the following oath. If men in government, as well as every citizen, would obey the requirements of this oath, there would be no subversives in this country. I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter, so help me God. A very sick American. My great-grandmother kept a journal of the trip across the Great Plains with a wagon and oxen when she and great-grandpa were youngsters coming out to settle in California in the Great Migration. On the trail she wrote of sickness and hunger and heat and cold and dust and thirst, and the deaths and births like beads strung together on a thread of hope of freedom, and a land of plenty for their children yet unborn. The ink was badly faded, but the message was clear. As I read, I began to think about America and being an American and what it all stands for. And I thought about our enemies and what they intend to do to this America, to these rich lands and farms, to the cities and the people, to its freedom and its hope. And suddenly I realized that I am a sick American. I mean really sick. I am sick of panaceas and of backing up. I am sick of bureaucrats who tell me that my enemy is not really my enemy, and that I should live together with murderers and tyrants. I am sick of government that hasn't the guts to clean traitors out of its own offices. And I am sick of being a nice patient guy about it. I am sick of placidly accepting excuses instead of successes, of being a silent gentleman about it for fear of controversy. I am sick of my own country being ridiculed all over the world. I am sick of pink-fingered diplomats and lily-livered politicians who place personal careers above the fate of the flag. I am sick of 40 years of relentless creeping cancerous communistic godlessness that never once has wavered from its avowed purpose of conquering our flag and seeing it trampled in the mud under Russian boots. I am sick of my gentle desire to stand pat while the enemy advances. I am sick of educators who teach tolerance of subversion and of clergymen who would have me quail at the specter of battle and turn my other cheek in fear of what our enemies might do. In all honesty, the thing of which I am sickest is the man who let these things come to be myself. And by the living God who made me, sir, I am a sick American who intends to get well. The true principles of respect and honor within individuals or nations must be nurtured continually or decay sets in. Today these principles are withering away. Something is making America sick. We are hatching a nation of beatniks and yuppies brandishing switchblades and bike chains. Our movies are not better than ever, they are dirtier than ever, and Hollywood is engrossed in a multi-billion-dollar business perpetrating their horizontal art. The best sellers in literature are little better than the Playboy magazines. Schooling has evolved into a progressive education which starts teaching sex to kids in kindergarten, but prohibits them from the Bible. Our youth are drifting into a nation of pleasure-seeking, welfare bums, from which many are becoming lesbians, rapists, dope addicts and psychopaths. Gambling dens and brothel houses are mushrooming everywhere, and the liquor trade has become a major industry. We are drowning our youngsters in violence, cynicism, and sadism piped into the living room and even the nursery. The grandchildren of the kids who used to weep because the little match girl froze to death now feel cheated if she isn't slugged, raped, and thrown into a Bessemer converter. Jenkin Lloyd Jones. Editor, Tulsa Tribune. What has happened to the cultural theater where talent and artistry were the feature attractions instead of nudism? Where's romanticism in literature, those stories which made heroes and raised the moral aspirations of the reader? Why must every story or plot be drowned with sex, insanity, or murder? All of this perversion has been pawned off on a gullible public in the name of realism. Maybe our neighbors are not that real yet, but if this trash is heaped upon us much longer, they will become converted to those ideals. School kids are not tossed out of school for smoking anymore. Teachers are joining with them in marijuana sessions. The beauties of life are not explained in nature, but experienced on a trip with LSD. For an evening out, it's dinner at a topless nightclub, raw and lusty jokes from an entertainer, and then on to a party where house keys are swapped. The crime rate increases and so do social welfare checks. The criminal is protected by the technicalities of the law, while the policeman is bashed on the head with a brick, spit on, and hauled up before a review board for police brutality. Shades of the Roman Empire. We are a nation of pawns in a game with international conspirators and criminals. Through our own faults and follies, we are being exploited by alien influences and evils. Wherever crimes, sins, or corruptions can be added to our citizens, there will also be found subversives to promote them. There must be a moral and spiritual revival in America to challenge the opposition. We are not the helpless victims of our environment, doomed to destruction. The fault lies not in our environment but in ourselves. The political, judicial, educational and cultural organizations of a free society can function only when the individual citizens have enlightened minds and are dedicated to the foundations of freedom. The basic responsibility rests on each one. Material forces alone do not determine the destinies of men. The resources of an infinite God can change the balance of material assets. These resources are liberated through the prayer, the sacrifice, and the intelligent organization of people filled with the love of God. Fundamentally, the problem is a moral and spiritual one. The foundations of freedom must be girded with a moral and spiritual revival. As free men humbly seek God and present their bodies, minds and hearts to their country and the cause of all mankind, we may well believe that the tyranny shall not triumph and freedom shall not perish from the earth. You can trust the communists, page 182. Are there not still some Americans who get a lump in their throats when they hear the Star-Spangled Banner, and who thank the merciful Lord for the privilege of being born American citizens? I am tired and weary of beatniks who say they have a right to determine what laws of the land they are willing to obey. I am tired and fed up with the segment of society in which it is difficult to distinguish a male from a female, and who claim they represent the new wave of America, and who sneer at the old-fashioned virtues of honesty, integrity, and morality on which America grew to greatness. I am tired and getting madder by the day of the filth peddlers who have launched Americans in an obscenity race. I am tired of bearded bums who tramp the picket lines and sit-ins that denounce the United States and the principles of Christian democracy. There is still some room in Africa, Cuba, Russia and Communist China for those who have sought on every hand to abolish our sacred trust in God. I am tired of those who think capitalism is a dirty word and who think free enterprise and private initiative are symbols of greed. Picture with caption that says, "Unbelievable but true." A moratorium crowd approaches the Washington Monument, November 15, 1969, carrying Viet Cong flags. Washington officials allowed these Viet Cong flags to fly freely during this moratorium. Human Events U. June 3, 1961. I didn't want to die. Walking across the rice paddies of Vietnam toward a mountain range, the young American soldier commented to a buddy, "How quiet and deserted it is, nor even the birds are singing." Suddenly the fire from automatic rifles seemed to come from every bush. The young man tried to save the life of his buddy by grabbing him and pulling him into the bushes to safety. He never saw the rifle the enemy fired at him point blank from a few paces away. A month after the youngster's death, one of the buddies found a letter under his bunk, a letter written while he was still alive, in which he anticipated his death. His commanding officer mailed it to the soldier's parents in Graham, North Carolina. What follows is the text of that letter, which this year received the Freedom's Foundation's highest honor as PFC. Hiram D. Strickland's father and mother read it for the first time, some 30 days after he was buried. "Dear folks, I'm writing this letter as my last one. You've probably already received word that I'm dead and that the government wishes to express its deepest regret. Believe me, I didn't want to die, but I know it was part of my job. I want my country to live for billions and billions of years to come. I wanted to stand as a light to all people oppressed and guide them to the same freedom we know. If we can stand and fight for freedom, then I think we have done the job God set down for us. It's up to every American to fight for the freedom we hold so dear. If we don't, the smells of freedom air could become dark and damp as in a prison cell. We won't be able to look at ourselves in a mirror, much less at our sons and daughters, because we know we have failed our God, our country, and our future generations. I can hold my head high because I fought, whether it be in heaven or hell. Besides, the saying goes, one more GI from Vietnam, St. Peter, I've served my time in hell. I fought for Sandy, Nell, Gail, Mom and Dad. But when the twins and Sandy's kids get old enough, they'll probably have to fight, too. Tell them to go proudly and without fear of death, because it is worth keeping the land free. I remember a story from Mr. Williams' English classes, when I was a freshman, that said, the cowards die 1,000 times, the brave die but once. Don't mourn me, mother, for I'm happy I died fighting my country's enemies, and I will live forever in people's minds. I've done what I've always dreamed of. Don't mourn me, for I died a soldier of the United States of America. God bless you all and take care. I'll be seeing you in heaven. Your loving son and brother. Butch. Where is that country we used to know? In the America of yesterday you paid your debts as quickly as possible and went without things to do it. You disciplined your children but disciplined yourself first. You spent less than you earned and demanded your government do the same. You went to church, your children to Sunday school, you held daily prayers and no court would have dared to interpose any law into your private religions. You would have been horrified at, and quick to change, men in high places who made deals. You expected to prosper only by doing a better and better job. You obeyed the law but took active enough part in government to see that the laws were just. You walked softly but carried a big stick. And that was the character which brought this country victory in 3 wars in your lifetime, built it back from a shattering depression, and fed and saved the civilized world. Is there enough of it left to do it again? A time to stand. There comes a time in everyone's life when your conscience can tolerate no more compromise, when for your self-respect, but chiefly that of your children, you have to risk their safety and yours, their future, you'd gladly waive yours, to do what you know in your heart is right. And no longer hesitate because of any consequence. Every father and mother has had that agonizing choice. And every nation that survived. Read history. The ones who chose safety got slavery. The ones who chose self-respect got, often after pain, peace with honor. We believe this country must make such a choice now. The screams for compromise, for pulling our future for safety, peace at any price, are not, we solemnly believe, the voice of America. The real Americans who build this country, whose taxes pay its bills, who do the fighting for it, the screamers would not, are anxious, but not afraid. This is a time to stand, and we believe these true Americans are saying this is the time. No heroics but no cringing, either, what is right, for America. And then when America is safe again, trust American charity to do what it can for the rest of the world. March 14, 1966. Have you ever wished that you could venture away to some little island away from all the daily struggles? How about some little island in the Pacific away from the reaches of salesmen, telephones, doorbells? Have you thought about the grandeur of such a place where there are no grocery bills, rent, taxes or car payments? Doesn't this sound like a paradise? Plenty of food and water, no worries about checkbook balances or retirement. There is just such an island and many Americans have been there. It only cost one thing to get their freedom. The name of the island is Alcatraz. We need not be so gullible over the false theories of socialist revolutionaries as to purchase them with the price of freedom. A society built on social security, welfare, total protection and socialism could be nothing more than a prison because it has no freedom. A prison has perfect security and that is the only virtue of socialism. America has always been willing to help other nations to become free and independent. However, we have been overextending and misappropriating materials and money for many years. America has virtually saved the Soviet Union several times and we are still giving them aid and wealth. Communist prophecy. They, the Americans, will furnish credits which will serve as a means to support the communist parties, and by supplying us with materials and techniques which are not available to us, they will build our war industry, which is essential to our future attacks on our suppliers. In other words, they will be laboring to prepare their own suicides. 1. Lenin. Our government has become top-heavy, inefficient, and excessively expensive. It was not intended to become that way, said Thomas Jefferson. The way to have good and safe government is not to trust it all to one, but to divide it among the many, distributing to everyone exactly the functions he is competent to. What has destroyed liberty and the rights of man in every government which has existed under the sun? The generalizing and concentrating all cares and powers into one body, no matter whether of the autocrats of Russia or France, or the aristocrats of a Venetian Senate. Our country is too large to have all its affairs directed by a single government. Public servants at such a distance, and from under the eye of their constituents, must, from the circumstance of distance, be unable to administer and overlook all the details necessary for the good government of the citizens, and the same circumstance, by rendering detection impossible to their constituents, will invite the public agents to corruption, plunder, and waste. And I do verily believe that if the principle were to prevail, of a common law being in force in the United States, it would be the most corrupt government on the earth. What an augmentation of the field for jobbing, speculating, plundering, office building and office hunting would be produced by an assumption of all the state powers into the hands of the general government. The true theory of our Constitution is surely the wisest and best, that the states are independent as to everything within themselves, and united as to everything respecting foreign nations. When all government, domestic and foreign, in little as in great things, shall be drawn to Washington as the center of all power, it will render powerless the checks provided of one government on another, and will become as venal and oppressive as the government from which we separated. The Wisdom of Thomas Jefferson. By Edward Boykin, pages 28, 30, 32, 33. There are dangerous steps along the path from freedom to slavery. Checks and balances were meant to keep our government in the form of a republic. However, it too can be subverted, and thereby become venal and oppressive, causing the seeds of revolution to again be sown in its citizens. 1. The people go from chains to spiritual faith. 2. From spiritual faith to courage. 3. From courage to liberty. 4. From liberty to abundance. 5. From abundance to selfishness. 6. From selfishness to complacency. 7. From complacency to apathy. 8. From apathy to dependency. 9. From dependency back again to bondage. How far along the way is America? It's not too late to stop the clock. An excellent example of comparative fruits of the capitalist and communist concepts is portrayed in the nation of Germany. This nation, split in two, lives under the ideologies of both systems. After World War II, the Soviet Army built the Iron Curtain across the German nation, splitting east from west. East Germany was plundered and stripped of its industry and wealth. 17 million people in the German East Zone can testify to the wonderful blessings of the Soviet Socialist Republic. Today, after 20 years of communist influence, one of their citizens is fortunate to be able to purchase more than 2 pounds of potatoes at a time. Eggs, cheese, milk and even a small soup bone are difficult to obtain. East Germany is scarcely able to survive with the poverty and starvation that has stricken them through the Soviet socialist system. West Germany has developed from the debris of war to the strongest economic nation in all of Europe. Another illustration of capitalism and communism was well described by an anonymous author. 2 memorials, 2 ways of life. For the first time in history, the entire globe has become one community, but it is a community in which 2 opposing ways of life are competing, both struggling to win the allegiance of the mind and heart of mankind. Sometime in the course of the 1970s, the issue will be decided. There are many ways of contrasting these competing systems. Over the years, I've often found myself thinking of them in terms of 2 men, Lenin and Lincoln. It seems to me that Lenin's tomb in Moscow and the Lincoln Memorial in Washington are symbolic of the men and of the ways of life they represent. The Lincoln Memorial is a beautiful, gleaming white. Lenin's is a hard, highly polished, metallic black. Visiting the Lincoln Memorial, you go up the steps into the white light of day. Visiting the Lenin Mausoleum, you trudge along a narrow hallway, the walls 15 of which are dark, deep red. Eventually you turn, go down steps, turn and go down more steps. Finally you are some 30 feet beneath the earth in a small, eerily lighted vault, shuffling around a rectangular pit of blackness, out of which emerges a black stone shaft, atop of which there's a thick black marble slab. On this slab, bedded on a luxurious red silk cushion, there lies the body of a man, Lenin. Over the lower part of his body a red flag has been thrown. Just below his crossed hands there is a golden object gleaming in the dim blue light that comes from overhead, the crossed sickle and hammer. At the Lincoln Memorial, you raise your eyes and look up. To view a tight-lipped waxen Lenin, you look down. In one, you are closed in as in a dungeon, in the other, you seem to be a part of God's great out-of-doors. In one, though you are looking at what remains of the actual physical body of a man, it is unquestionably something dead and artificial. In the other, though it is chiseled marble, warmth and life somehow breathe through it. You look up to a tall gaunt man with a kindly face, whose brooding eyes are turned toward the gleaming dome of the capital of the nation he held together. What a contrast in the character and the meaning of these two men. Lenin once declared. It's a fight to the end, to their complete annihilation. He was referring to our annihilation, to the annihilation of all peoples, and the destruction of all institutions, not specifically and completely communist-dominated. Lincoln said. With malice toward none. With charity for all. Lenin devoted his entire life setting one class against another, Lincoln said. You cannot help the poor by destroying the rich, you cannot help the wage earner by pulling down the wage payer. Lenin said. Nothing is right or wrong, false or true, good or bad, except as it furthers the revolution. Lincoln said. With firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right. Lenin said. One would like to caress the masses, but one doesn't dare. Like dogs, they turn and bite. Lincoln said, God must have loved the common people, he made so many of them. How often we sing our national anthem, but fail to read the meaning of the words. So too, we often enjoy the harvests of American freedom, but seldom understand the reasons we have them. Oh, beautiful for pilgrim feet, whose stern impassioned stress a thoroughfare for freedom beat across the wilderness. America, America, God mend thine every flaw. Confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty in law. Oh, beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. America, America, may God thy gold refine, till all success be nobleness and every gain divine. Oh, beautiful for patriot dream, that sees beyond the years, thine alabaster cities gleam, undimmed by human tears. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining sea. A true love story. I was reading a history book in the 7th grade when I first noticed her, and I suddenly felt a bit of childish passion. By the time I graduated from high school I had fallen in love. She may be a little on the large size, but who cares? To me she's the most beautiful thing on earth. I love her for many reasons, and one of them is her compassion for others. She's always thinking of someone else, always giving of herself. When I stop to think of the numerous people she has helped when they need her, I can't find the words to express myself. No, she's not perfect by any means, but then, who is? All I care is that she tries hard to be just what I want her to be. How many others can say that? Not many. I know. I've been around. She's gentle and kind and gives with her heart. And when I see anyone trying to take advantage of her, it makes my blood boil. I guess I'm just jealous. Haven't I the right to be? I'd never stand by and see anyone try to take her away from me. She's too precious, besides she depends on me too much. I'll go on loving and protecting her to the day I die. Of course there are times when I tell her things that are wrong. But after I've told her, she always does her best to change them for me. I'm proud of her for that. I've only to let her know how I feel and be a little patient. No one can change things in a day, can they? It's when I've been away for a while that I really miss her and realize how much I long to get back. What's that saying? Absence makes the heart grow fonder? As I near home, she's waiting there with outstretched arms to offer me all of the wonderful things I have never been able to find in this cockeyed world. I know. I've been around. Everywhere I've traveled I've made a comparison and could not find one who could compare. I never have, I never will. I'm convinced after all these years. When I go to sleep each night I rest peacefully knowing that she is there, belonging to me. And in my heart I'll always keep her precious name, America. There's not another beauty like her in all of God's world. I know. I've been around. AFPS. America has grown quickly from infancy to a gentle giant. America has stood above all other nations in glory, power, and respect, yet always a friend to every other nation. America has recently been sleeping like Samson, while traitors like Delilah have sought to betray the secrets of his strength and to conspire with the enemy. Previously, like Delilah, who cried, "The Philistines are upon you," we as Americans have met the enemy and destroyed their attacks and conspiracies. However, we are now living when the last call of the enemy is upon you is heard. The secrets of our strength are in the hands of our enemies. Traitors walk among us as our own flesh and blood, and our strength has been gradually diminishing. We, like Samson, are sleeping. Shall we remain reposed until the enemy is upon us? Or shall we awaken to the conspiracies, the strength of the enemy, and the plight of our condition? It is time to make haste and fortify ourselves for the inevitable clash of the coming American Revolution.